Chapter 482, Charles Lingling vs. Golden Lion. Shiji rumors had been swirling that the Rockefeller Pirates and Golden Lion Shiji were secretly in league, carving up the new world between them. Their mutual indifference only fueled the gossip, and even the Whitebeard pirates, ever suspicious of anyone growing too powerful, kept a wary eye on Rockefeller's fleet. After all, it was Charles Lingling who had once rescued Shiji. Many found it hard to believe such a life-saving debt could exist without strings attached. Now, in the first half of the New World, a restless sea stretched beneath a slate sky. Dozens of ships formed two rival lines across the rolling waves. High above, Golden Lion Shiji's flying pirates hovered like vultures, peering down at the Big Mom pirates' vessels bellowing below. On the ocean's surface, Charles Lingling's fleet rode the swells with equal confidence. Tension crackled in the salt-thick air as the two armadas confronted one another. A booming laugh split the silence. Golden Lion Shiji, towering and fierce, leaned over the side of his flagship. "Ha, Charles Lingling, you haven't changed a bit in all these years," he called. Charles squared his shoulders, the wind whipping at his coat. Shiji blinked, struggling to reconcile the stout figure before him with the memory of the sea's most dazzling beauty. Where had that young woman gone, he wondered. Yet there stood Charles, every bit the captain he'd once known, only different. Golden Lion Shiji rubbed his eyes in disbelief. "Well, well, old man Shiji," Charles Lingling snarled, brandishing the flaming Napoleon sword. "You finally escaped, and instead of lying low, you have the nerve to stroke my beard and challenge my territory? You must really want to die." Charles's voice rang out across the scorched battlefield. Fresh from years of defeat and humiliation, first at the hands of Charlotte Rockefeller's pirates, then under the crushing might of Edward Newgate, the Whitebeard, he had never once gained the upper hand. Each clash for territory had ended with his lands carved away by rival crews. He'd held back his rage for so long. But now, with Shiji daring to push him this far, that anger threatened to consume him. Shiji laughed, a low, mocking rumble. "Your territory," he echoed, stepping forward with casual arrogance. "When I was locked up, you quietly stole from me, slaughtered my men, and now you call this yours? Ha ha! I think it's about time I took it all back." He swept one hand toward the smoking crater behind him, a silent promise that he would carve out a bigger claim yet, starting with Charles and his fiery blade. "How do we settle this?" Charles Lingling called to his officers, eyes fixed on the rising wind. A savage laugh cut through the tension. Perched on the forecastle of his flagship, the Golden Lion Shiki grinned wildly. "Settle it?" he taunted. "Humph, you lost the right to, what's the phrase, compete for supremacy the moment the Navy dragged you in. Now you're nothing but a washed-up loser." Anger flared in Charles's chest. "You dare!" Before he could finish, Shiki's twin sabers were in motion. "Kill him!" he roared. At his command, the flying pirates gave a deafening shout. "Rip him apart!" Across the waves, nearly 100 ships, half loyal to Charles, half to Shiki, erupted in a thunderous exchange of cannon fire. The sea around them boiled with smoke and flame. Muskets cracked and shells lit up the sky. Seizing the moment, Charles lifted his cutlass, Napoleon, and charged through the chaos. He met Shiki head-on, steel clashing with steel in a shower of sparks. Shiki staggered under the force of Charles's blow, eyes widening as he sensed the raw strength behind every strike. Charles leaned in, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "Well, well, Shiki," he jeered. "Looks like someone's feeling his age." A harsh laugh rang out as Charles pressed his assault, Napoleon's blade whistling inches from Shiki's face with each deadly arc. Charles laughed triumphantly. "Ha! You're too early for that!" Slash! Shijiraru's blade whistled, through the air, aiming straight at Charles's midsection. "Go!" Charles countered instantly, swinging his sword in a graceful arc. His cross-slash met Shijiraru's blow with a thunderous crack that sent waves pounding across the ocean. "Brother Katakuri!" someone shouted as the two fleets, Big Mom pirates and Sky pirates, clashed all around them. On deck, Charles had ushered the younger Charlotte children to safety, but the roar of battle left them trembling. Swords clanged, cannon smoke drifted, and the sea itself seemed to recoil from the violence. Then, without warning, a towering wall of mochi erupted behind Charles. Descending like a god upon the crowded deck was Charlotte Katakuri, his expression serene even as dozens of armed pirates charged him. Mirage rice cake, Katakuri intoned. In an instant, his arms liquefied into molten mochi and lashed outward in a mighty surge. Every pirate caught in the onslaught was hurled overboard, spewing blood as they plunged into the rolling waves. None could withstand the assault. Katakuri was simply untouchable. Watching from a distance, Ace's widow tightened her fingers around the hilt of the long sword at her waist. She exhaled in awe. He's become even stronger. Estes, standing beside her, nodded slowly. Stronger, huh? It just feels off, Caesar muttered, half asleep. Why did Father drag us out here to watch this scrap? What's so special about it? Esdeath paid him no mind, her eyes fixed on the duel below between Charlotte Lingling and Golden Lion Shiji. She hoped to pick up a few tactics from their clash. Look, over there, she said quietly. The Whitebeard pirates have arrived. Tesla's ears twitched as he tilted his head toward the west. On the horizon, a colossal ship cut through the waves, and at its prow stood the legendary Whitebeard. His gaze swept the small launch until it settled on the three Rockefeller siblings. With a booming voice, he called out, "What sharp eyesight you've got, boy. If I'm not mistaken, you're Tesla, second son of Charles Rockefeller, right?" Standing beside him, Marco nodded gravely. That's right. Tesla Rockefeller commands the rumble fruit. He can summon lightning at will. He's a fearsome ally. Caesar let out a short laugh, ruffling his hair. So, all of Charles's children have shown up, yet father himself is missing. Doesn't he worry we might get torn to pieces out here? Whitebeard chuckled, stroking his massive mustache. Your old man may be eccentric, but he's never careless. If he thought you were in real danger, he'd be here in a heartbeat, even if it means putting himself in the thick of the fight. Natural type devil fruit, the thunder fruit no less. That boy Charles is exceptionally lucky. Whitebeard chuckled, smacking his lips in envy. The rest of the Whitebeard pirates exchanged looks of begrudging admiration, Tesla's eyes glinting with jealousy among them. From the shadows, a hidden watcher's gaze flicked excitedly toward the prize. The thunder fruit? The strongest natural type. Not bad at all, he murmured. Someone nearby wrinkled their brow. Tiki, what are you talking about? They asked, clearly having misheard. Tiki cleared his throat and straightened up. I mean exactly what my father said. That thunder fruit belongs with us, the Whitebeard pirates. Letting anyone else claim it would be a crime. He beamed. Ha! Teach is right. Only the strongest crew should wield the strongest power. A chorus of agreement rose around him, and Whitebeard's grin grew wider at their loyalty. Yet in the distance, Tesla couldn't suppress a mocking smile. What's so funny, Tesla? Caesar Clown called out, folding his arms. It's nothing, Tesla replied lightly. Just amusing to see so many fools celebrating something they'll never control. As the wielder of the thunder fruit, Charles had long ago learned to fuse his electromagnetic powers with both observation Haki and armament Haki. Chapter 483, Diverging Ideals. Tesla's new heart network outstripped everything Charles had ever seen. Its coverage wasn't just global, it reached into the void of space. Charles stared in stunned silence, struggling to fathom a network so immense. Beside him, Thunderfruit refused to be left out. He pressed forward, eager to sense the network's commanding presence firsthand, a persistence that bordered on the peculiar. Remarkable, Caesar said, nodding at Tesla's demonstration with mild approval. Father sent us here to observe, not to wade into every skirmish. Right now, the flying pirates are locked in battle with Big Mom's crew, and the Whitebeard pirates have just entered the fight. Who knows how this will end? He swept his gaze over the horizon, where flames and smoke marked the clash of titans. On the Diaoyutai's deck, Whitebeard's men stood ready. Caesar yawned, completely unfazed. Even if they annihilate each other, it's not our problem. Esdeath remained on guard, her hand never straying from the hilt of her sword. Her eyes were fixed on the center of the battlefield, where Shiji and Charles Lingling faced off amid the chaos. A wistful smile touched her lips. I really envy Father, she confessed softly, her voice drowned out by the roar of combat. Caesar flopped onto the ship's railing, exasperated. He just stays at home every day and leaves everything to us. Esdeath shot him a cool look. If it weren't for Father's hard work, the Rockefeller pirates wouldn't have a shred of glory. Now that he's grown older and lost his drive, it's our turn to carry the torch. Let him enjoy his retirement in peace. Her words hit Caesar and Tesla like a splash of cold water. They stared at her, stunned. Esdeath, always so steely, was telling them to step aside and let their father rest, and he was only 37. Among their crew, Charles was the baby of the family. Am I wrong? Esdeath pressed on, turning to face Caesar and Tesla. Remember what father told us not long ago? He said he has no interest in the title of Pirate King, yet he holds the key to the map that leads to Rafdru. He even possesses a fragment that no one else can access. While the rest of us push forward, racing toward the Pirate King's treasure on Rafdru, what does he do? He's content to guard a fish pond and go fishing with the Red Earl every day. Does that make any sense? Her authoritative tone left Caesar and Tesla wordless. They had never heard the eldest sister speak with such conviction, and suddenly her argument felt impossible to refute. After a long silence, Tesla finally spoke, his voice tentative. I think there's something deeply rewarding about fishing. It stills your mind and washes away stress. Esdeath glanced at him with impassive steel-blue eyes, and Tesla felt a shiver run down his spine. Sister, Caesar interjected, his tone low but urgent, you've been at this since childhood, always pushing, always striving. Haven't you ever wanted a moment of peace for yourself? Or is this just another competition, a bid for the Pirate King's crown? Esdeath's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. A murderous glint flickered in her eyes, and even Tesla and Caesar felt the air grow colder. I have no interest in the title of Pirate King, she said softly. All I've ever wanted is to be so powerful that no one can lay a hand on me or on our family. If father demands a Pirate King, I will carve that path for him, but my true goal is strength, ultimate strength, so I can protect those I care for. Caesar stepped forward, concern etched on his face. You're taking this too far, sister. Yes, father taught us to be strong enough to survive the coming turmoil, but not to lose ourselves in our own ambition. Strength is the only thing that matters. Esdeath's voice was as cold and unyielding as ice. She made no effort to soften her words for Caesar. Ever since childhood, their philosophies had drifted further and further apart, and now they barely spoke without clashing. Caesar remained silent. He knew she was right. Ideas held no weight without the power to enforce them. Without power, they, and everyone who believed in them, would be crushed like ants underfoot. Around them, the distant roar of battle rolled across the open sea. Below, countless soldiers, mere pawns in this war, lay dead on the deck and along the jagged shoreline. They had given their lives to causes they might never have understood. Life had never felt so cheap. A heavy weariness settled over Caesar. He longed for sleep, for a temporary escape from the guilt and doubt gnawing at him. If he could just close his eyes, he might buy himself a few hours of peace, and perhaps find clarity in the morning. On the other side of the deck, Tesla watched the siblings in uneasy silence. As Caesar's younger comrade, he didn't dare choose sides. Best not to speak, he decided. Best to keep his head down. More than anything, he wanted to return to his laboratory, to tinker with coils and magnets, far from the thunder of cannon fire and the burden of impossible decisions. The three of them stood, or in Caesar's case, leaned against the railing, each lost in his own thoughts while the ship pressed on into the blood-stained horizon. Chapter 1. Night had fallen over the open sea, and the darkness was split only by flashes of cannon fire. I stood at the rail of our flagship, heart-pounding, as ships crashed and burned in a desperate melee. Nearly 100 pirate crews were locked in combat, hundreds more ships than I had ever imagined, each volley of cannonballs shredding sails and tearing hulls apart. The stench of smoke and salt water stung my nostrils, and all around me I saw men with bloodshot eyes and trembling hands, their faces twisted with either fury or terror. My fellow Whitebeard pirates, many of them rookies fresh to the crew, held their weapons so tightly their knuckles were white. All week they had boasted they'd smash the Rockefellers and teach the Big Mom pirates a lesson. Yet now, confronted with this slaughter, not a man dared speak above a whisper. They had expected a quick, glorious fight, something father could finish in a single punch, like he always did in the taverns or during smaller skirmishes. None of us had been ready for this horror. Above the churning waves, I glimpsed our two sides' captains locked in a titanic struggle. Every time they clashed, the shockwave split the night sky, and the sea itself seemed to recoil, water rushing backward in swirling currents. I felt the ground of the deck shudder beneath my boots. That terrible, awe-inspiring collision was seared into my mind. The greatest warriors on the Grand Line, pitted against each other in a fury so wild it defied words. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. I had grown up believing that Father, the legendary Whitebeard, would lead us all to glory, to topple every rival and crown himself Pirate King. I'd never questioned it. But standing here now, amid the wreckage and the screams, I realized war was far more brutal, far more real than any storybook victory. My fingers curled around the hilt of my sword. The order had come down. Mine was to follow Father's command, to fight. And so I would. But as I stared into the chaos, a new resolve stirred in me. I wouldn't be just another blade in his hand. I would become someone worthy of standing at his side, someone who could face this carnage head-on and live. Above us, the thunder of the clash rang on, and I lifted my chin, ready to charge into the fray. On the deck of the Moby Dick, the aftermath of today's battle finally sank in, and with it, the realization of how naive they'd all been. A young pirate, eyes still fixed on the war raging on the horizon, blurted what everyone was thinking. "Pa, is Charles Lingling really that strong?" Whitebeard simply nodded, then addressed his crew in his deep, measured voice. "Boys, this is the greatest clash you'll ever witness." He paused, letting the words settle in. "Anyone who's faced the Big Mom pirates knows how terrifying they are. Yet the Rockefeller pirates defeated them. Think about that. What must it take to bring down an opponent like Big Mom?" At that moment, a thunderous roar split the sky. The sea itself seemed to pull backward, as if the world were being rewound. The newcomers, still reeling from the spectacle, snapped to attention. They'd heard the stories of Big Mom's might, but now they'd seen her humbled. If the Rockefeller pirates could achieve that, what hope did any rival fleet have of standing in their way? Could they truly dominate the New World? A charged silence fell over the deck as each sailor wrestled with his own doubts and ambitions. New dreams of glory ignited in their hearts, and Whitebeard, watching the change in his crew, allowed himself a small, pleased smile. The voyage ahead had just become a lot more exciting. Chapter 484, Whitebeard's Concerns. I, Charles, had assumed my only role was to observe Shiji's latest tactics. But the skirmish ended up delivering a harsh, unforgettable lesson to Whitebeard's sons, exactly the kind of eye-opener their father had been struggling to provide. Though the force involved numbered just over 2,000 men, their staggered return carried stories of brutal losses and the grim realities of war. News of their defeat spread like wildfire through the fleet, and for once, the men who idolized Father found themselves thinking twice before glorifying every battle. Since the dawn of the Age of Discovery, pirates everywhere have chased the legend of Gol D Roger. To find his hidden treasure on Raftel and wear the crown of Pirate King, that has been the single obsession binding every crew to the next. Whitebeard's adopted sons were no exception. Day after day, they clamored for their captain to claim the throne. But to stand unchallenged in the New World, they would first have to uproot the two other great powers entrenched there, the Rockefellers and the Big Mom pirates. And neither of those fleets would be easy to bring down. Whitebeard had known both captains of those rival crews for years, so well, in fact, that they'd once sailed under the same flag. He understood their strengths intimately, and he'd long feared that if their hot-headed sons took charge, the Whitebeard pirates would be the first to crumble. That was why he always avoided a direct clash with either the Flying Pirates or the Big Mom pirates. The last time tensions flared, the Rockefeller pirates had quietly bolstered their numbers, and Whitebeard had felt a cold dread settle in his chest. He worried that Charles, impetuous as he was, might barrel into Whitebeard territory with his entire crew, demanding explanations. Forcing them back unceremoniously would be a slap in the face. Placating them would only invite more demands. Either way, it spelled a larger conflict. Now, however, the young captains had shown surprising restraint, and Whitebeard finally allowed himself a relieved sigh. From the deck below, Marco climbed up beside his father, eyes fixed on two figures locked in combat high above the waves. "Father," he asked, shading his brow, "who do you think will win between those two?" He didn't mean the broader war between the Flying Pirates and the Big Mom pirates. He was pointing to the duel unfolding in the sky, eager for his father's verdict on the fighters before them. Marco had no doubt. This battle would ultimately be decided between Golden Lion Shiji and Charles Lingling. At his side, Whitebeard watched the two fighters intently. Their clash was brutal and evenly matched. Neither warrior had yet seized a clear advantage. But Whitebeard wasn't just any spectator. He'd once been Shiji's fiercest rival, and he knew how a lion should roar when at full strength. What he saw now was muted, a martial fire that had dimmed. After a long, thoughtful pause, Whitebeard spoke in a low, measured tone. Charles Lingling has a very real chance of winning this fight. The reaction was instantaneous. Among the onlookers, murmurs swelled into outraged protests. "Father, that's preposterous," one voice cried. "Golden Lion Shiji is your equal in fame and might. He can't lose." Besides, another scoffed, "Charles Lingling already fell to Rockefeller Charlotte. How can he possibly stand up to Shiji?" A third chimed in, "Shiji is the man who defied the Navy headquarters itself. Do you really think he'd be taken down by someone like Charles Lingling?" All around Whitebeard, heads shook in disbelief. Yet the old pirate remained still, his gaze fixed on the arena. He alone could see the subtle falter in Shiji's guard, and the keen determination in Charles's eyes. The outcome, he believed, hung in the balance. Whitebeard forced a wry smile. "I can't quite explain it," he admitted, "but I've noticed Shiji, our Golden Lion, has lost some of his edge. He was unstoppable in his prime, and now, well, it's as if something's knocked him off balance." He watched Shiji's blade arc through the air with growing concern. Is that really possible?" A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the onlookers. "Let's not draw conclusions before the fight's over," someone muttered. "We'll see who comes out on top." Before the debate could escalate, Marco swept the crowd with a single, commanding look. He couldn't believe his brothers had the gall to argue with their father over whether Shiji or Charles should earn the Golden Lion crown. "Dad's too soft on them," Marco thought, shaking his head. His gaze alone silenced the room. Everyone here knew he was their father's second-in-command, both in strength and reputation. Though father preached fairness among his sons, it was no secret that Marco was the one he trusted most. Marco's place in father's heart was unshakable. Whitebeard chuckled at Marco's remark. "Keep your eyes on the fight," he said. "This is a rare spectacle." He wasn't wrong. Even in the New World, battles of this scale almost never happen. The moment both sides commit fully, it becomes a fight to the death, every trump card brought to bear. Most conflicts there are limited skirmishes, a long-range barrage, a duel between opposing captains, or a probing attack by a lieutenant. Full fleet mobilizations are extraordinarily rare. In all his years, Whitebeard could recall only two comparable clashes. The first was when Charles, fresh off his return, took on his sister Lingling in a fierce duel. Garp broke it up before it reached its conclusion, so it hardly counted as a true showdown. The second was the legendary naval battle between the Sky Pirates and Edward Ed Wall of the Roger Pirates. Both sides threw everything they had into that fight, only for a savage storm to rip the battlefield apart. The Sky Pirates never truly recovered. At best, they regained strength, but they could never reclaim what they'd lost. A fierce clash had erupted between Shiki the Golden Lion and Charles, so intense that it drew the Navy's attention like iron to a magnet. Had Charles not swept in at the last second, both the Whitebeard pirates and the Sky Pirates might have been wiped out. Even now, I owe Charles a debt I've never had the chance to repay, and that unfulfilled obligation hangs over us, adding an edge to every glance and every order. At that moment, Whitebeard's booming voice cut through the chaos, silencing his sons in an instant. None dared approach while his infamous flag flew overhead. Even the tremors from distant cannon fire were hushed beneath his authority. To the men under his command, this battle was less a fight for survival and more a proving ground for their skills. Right in the heart of the fray, Shiki the Golden Lion threw back his head and laughed, a sound like rolling thunder. His golden mane bristled as he surveyed the scene. "Ha! So the old man with the white beard deigns to join us," he mocked. "Brave of him. But where's that boy Charles? All I see are a handful of inexperienced youths." With that, Shiki sprang forward, eyes alight with challenge, eager to add another chapter to his legendary reputation. Charles, whom the Golden Lion Shiji missed desperately, was off fishing with the Red Earl, so there was no one to break up the battle. Shiji's heart pounded as he realized how vulnerable he was. So, affection really could be redirected? No, Charles snapped, overhearing the thought. There's nothing like that between us. Shiji hesitated, brow furrowed. Then you'd better watch your own back. Before he could brace himself, Charles Lingling sprang forward with lightning speed, launching a fierce attack. Chapter 485, My head is about to explode. Smash! Sparks flew as Sakuraju's blade met Napoleon's in midair, raining molten metal over the battlefield. Their furious clash had already stretched over 3 days and 3 nights, and with each passing moment, the tide of battle shifted. "Boss Shiji, help us!" shouted one desperate sky pirate. "Somebody, help Boss Shiji!" "Captain, we can't hold out much longer." Time and again, the sky pirates fell beneath the might of the Big Mom pirates' officers, until Charles Katakuri personally swept through the enemy ranks. In an instant, he erased the last of their frontline commanders and dove into the fray himself, turning what had been a rout into a counterattack. Vrrr! Above the chaos, the golden mane homie Zeus writhed wildly, his oversized form gasping for breath, sweat gleaming on every strand of fur. Charles advanced with a cocky grin. Well, Senior Shiji, looks like you could use a hand." High overhead, perched atop a gathering thundercloud, sat Big Mom, Charlotte Linlin, cradling the tiny homie Napoleon in one massive arm. A saccharine smile played on her lips as she watched Charles's approach, her voice lilting unnaturally sweet. Every onlooker's stomach lurched. "When did Big Mom start talking like that?" someone muttered. Even Whitebeard's face twisted in mild disgust. Around them, horrified whispers spread through the ranks. "Ew! Gross! What kind of nonsense are you talking about?" Shiki snarled, brandishing his twin swords as he charged at Charles Lingling. Their blades met with a thunderous clang, but Charles, wielding the great sword Napoleon, effortlessly parried Shiki's furious onslaught. A slow, confident smile spread across Charles's face. "All right then, if you refuse to back down, I'll make you regret it." He lifted Napoleon high above his head. Sound cannon! In an instant, the fiery wrath of Prometheus and the crackling fury of Zeus fused into the blade. Charles brought the sword down in a devastating arc that seemed to warp the very air, and the ground beneath him trembled. Shiki staggered as though staring death itself in the eye. Even Edward Whitebeard Newgate, standing at the edge of the fray, felt a flicker of unease. On the sidelines, Esdeath, Caesar, and Tesla, sent here by Charles, watched in stunned silence. "He's unbelievable," Caesar muttered, crossing his arms. "No wonder Father's been so reluctant to make a move." Esdeath's lips curled in a cold, dismissive snort, and she said nothing more. Tesla, however, could barely contain his excitement. His eyes shone brighter than the lightning still dancing along Napoleon's blade. "Fire, thunder, and swordsmanship, all combined in one strike," Tesla breathed. "Incredible." He glanced at Esdeath and Caesar, whose faces now reflected the same dawning realization. Charles Lingling was more formidable than any of them had imagined. Esdeath's gloved hand tightened around her western sword. "We'll test it out when the time is right," she said coolly. Tesla's lips curved into a grin, but Caesar simply snorted. If you think you can kill me, be my guest." Across the deck, the golden lion Shiji had already slipped into a feral frenzy. Blonde hair streaming, she held her twin blades aloft. With a fierce battle cry, she brought them together in a blinding arc. "Lion, 1,000 bone cuts." An oppressive, overlord-tainted aura coalesced around her swords as she vaulted into the air, spinning. Razor-sharp arcs of energy surged outward, only to be smashed apart by a searing beam of golden light. "Light cannon!" Charles Lingling's voice rang out. The blast cracked the sky in half. Its sheer force struck Shiji head-on, tearing through her sword energy like splintered bamboo. Her eyes went wide, pupils shrinking to pinpricks as the brilliance swallowed her whole. "Boss! Captain!" The flying pirate's crew yelled in alarm, scrambling to the rails. Even weakened by the blow, the golden lion Shiji remained a terrifying powerhouse, but Charles's light cannon had then its might. None on that ship could deny it. When his beam struck true, few could stand against it. A shaft of golden light pierced the gathering clouds, bathing the golden lion Shiji in its radiance. All around, pirates and onlookers alike gasped in shock. Could Shiji, the formidable sea veteran who'd ruled the waves for over 20 years, actually have been bested by rising star Charles Lingling? Curious eyes strained to see the fallen lion beneath that blazing beam. Whitebeard's brow furrowed as he stared into the light. One of his crew broke the tense silence. "Pa, who won?" "Charles Lingling," Whitebeard replied evenly. "Shiji has been defeated. He may still draw breath, but he no longer has the strength to fight on." The Pirate King's expression remained unreadable as he watched his old rival slump to one knee. He'd sparred with Shiji for over 20 years, ever since the days of the Rocks Pirates, and now their final clash ended here. Time was a relentless opponent. In Whitebeard's mind flickered memories of Rocks, Roger, Rayleigh, and countless others, friends and adversaries slowly fading from the world. The ranks of familiar faces had thinned, and every survivor carried the weight of years on their shoulders. Then, as if summoned by fate itself, a single name echoed through his thoughts. Rockefeller Charles. Charles Rockford looked no older than his 20s, no wrinkle, no gray hair, no hint of age. Whitebeard blinked in surprise, then brushed it aside. Among all these old allies, Charles was clearly the youngest. Letting go of his astonishment, Whitebeard heaved a long sigh. "Our old friends, they're falling one by one." Standing at his father's side, Marco stiffened at the words. "Father," he said quietly but firmly, "I'll be by your side, always." At Marco's vow, Whitebeard's stern features softened into a rare, warm smile. He turned back to the maelstrom below. The so-called flying pirates were in full retreat, offering scarcely a resistance as Big Mom's forces, led by Charlotte Katakuri, swarmed them. Even Marco, Esdeath, and the others couldn't help but knit their brows at the sheer ferocity of Katakuri's assault. Then, suddenly, the cannon fire died away. Above the battlefield, Charlotte Lingling froze mid-attack, and every combatant tilted their heads up toward the sky. There, suspended like a statue against the clouds, was the golden lion Shiji. He held two massive swords crossed before him, bracing every muscle as a last volley of light cannon rounds hammered against his guard. When the final blast faded, Shiji trembled, on the verge of plunging from the heights. With a roar that rippled through the air, he unleashed the power of his piao piao fruit. Wind spiraled around him, lifting and steadying him once more. The tide of battle shifted in that instant, but the cost in blood and bone had never been higher. "Wow!" Golden Lion Shiji teetered off balance, clutching his chest as he spat a mouthful of blood. Crimson dripped from the corner of his mouth and oozed from the wound on his scalp where he'd gripped the rudder. His battered form sent a ripple of horror through the onlookers. Charles watched, frowning in surprise. He hadn't expected his strike to land so brutally. Yet Shiji straightened, coughing up more blood, a wild grin spreading across his face. "Ha! You think you can kill me, Golden Lion Shiji? You're not worthy. Not even Roger could." Shiji roared. He hefted his twin blades and charged. Before his swing could land, Shiji froze, eyes rolling back in agony. He sank to one knee, pressing both hands to his temples. "My head, it's going to explode," he keened, tears springing to his eyes. Instinctively, Charles halted mid-swing, sword still raised. His heart pounded as he watched Shiji collapse. "Shiji, what's wrong with you?" A stunned silence fell over everyone present as they stared at the fallen golden lion, bewildered by his sudden, crippling pain. Whitebeard frowned, watching Golden Lion Shiji's body convulse violently in midair. Chapter 486. The end of the legendary pirate Edward Whitebeard Newgate froze, staring in disbelief. Before him lay Golden Lion Shiki's severed head, blood still oozing around a massive ship's rudder that had impaled him. "Retreat!" Whitebeard barked, his great frame pivoting on the deck. A heavy silence fell as the rest of his crew hesitated. "Dad, what's wrong?" Marco shouted, rushing to his father's side. The 1st Division commander wore a troubled expression. He'd long been aware of the toll decades of battle had taken on Whitebeard's body. Old wounds, buried when he was younger, had flared up relentlessly in recent years. Whitebeard didn't answer. Instead, he glanced one last time at Shiki's motionless form and gave the order again, more softly this time. "Fall back." At once, the Blackbeard pirates scrambled to obey. Sails were furled, anchor cables hauled in, and the mighty vessel swung about. Marco watched his father's broad back, bittersweet regret tightening in his chest. How many more times would he hear the call of retreat from a man now nearing 60, his adversary in countless battles? On a nearby ship, Caesar Clown gaped at the carnage. This can't be. Uncle Shiki, He trailed off as Tesla, ever the strategist, assessed the scene with cold clarity. Shiki's flight apparatus malfunctioned, the rudder jammed in his skull. He's gone. Is it really over? Caesar stammered, eyes darting toward the horizon, where the Whitebeard flagship was already slipping from sight. Tesla only nodded. Yes, the battle has ended. With that, Caesar Clown turned briskly to his own crew. All right, everyone, ready the engines. We depart immediately. As the last of Whitebeard's banners disappeared into the gloom, a hush fell across the battlefield. The legendary Golden Lion was no more, and the age of one of the world's most fearsome pirates had come to an end. Esdeath watched Shiji thrashing overhead with a resigned sigh. It's almost tragic, she murmured, that one of this generation's greatest heroes and swordsmen should be felled by nothing more than a headache. With that, she turned on her heel and strode toward the cabin. Clearly, she had no patience left for this spectacle. Sister! Tesla called after her, panic creeping into his voice. Go back and tell father everything that's happened here. Esdeath replied over her shoulder, her tone cool and dismissive. Above the deck, Shiji, known throughout the fleet as the Golden Lion, clutched his temples as if the pain were tearing him apart from the inside. Summoning all his fading strength, he glided back toward the Sky Pirate flagship, crashing heavily onto the wooden planks. Sky, Captain, Lord Admiral, he groaned, his face contorted in agony. Pirate fighters skidded to land all around him, crews pouring out to see their leader in distress. Shiji rolled onto his side, moaning, My head, it's going to explode. Someone get the ship's doctor. A stunned hush fell over the onlookers until Indigo, one of the senior officers, pushed his way through the gathering crowd. Clear the way. Everyone, stand back. He knelt beside Shiji, pressing a steadying hand to the younger man's shoulders. Easy now, we're taking you straight to the infirmary. He barked orders at the hovering nurse, who'd swooped in moments later, and together they lifted the Golden Lion, urgency in every step, toward the ship's medical bay, leaving the deck eerily quiet in their wake. Get out! Get out! Indigo's shout shattered the stunned silence as he saw his crew frozen in place, the Big Mom pirates closing in like a relentless tide. He stamped his foot and bellowed again. Why are you still standing there? Fall back, now! A panicked voice rang out. It's no use. Master Shiji has fallen. Retreat. Those words were the spark. The remaining flying pirates erupted into chaos, scattering like headless chickens. Seizing the moment, Indigo abandoned everything else and raced to Shiji's side, hauling the wounded Golden Lion away from the fray. He couldn't save everyone. Those who lagged behind were left to the mercy of Big Mom's forces. In mere moments, the battered flying pirates were surrounded and cut down. Only Indigo and his small group managed to fight their way free from the massacre. High above on their ship's deck, Prospero grinned triumphantly and hurried to his mother. Mother, shall I give chase? Big Mom's victorious smile was proof enough. They had defeated one of the 4 emperors of the sea, the Sky Pirate Admiral, the Golden Lion Shiji, and shown the world the true power of the Big Mom pirates. From this day forward, the new world will bow to the 3 pirate emperors, and none shall dare underestimate the might of the Big Mom pirates. Charles Lingling watched the enemy ship vanish into the mist. Memories of his duel with Golden Lion Shiji flashed through his mind, and a sudden wave of regret washed over him. Why hadn't he struck Shiji down when he had the chance? He shrugged off the doubt. No matter, he's broken now, no longer a threat. From this moment on, this territory belongs to the Big Mom pirates. Long live our crew. A triumphant laugh tore from Charles's throat, echoing across the open sky. His crew roared their approval, a roar that rolled like thunder. With Shiji defeated, we'll stand unchallenged as the greatest pirate force in the New World. Their cheers rang out, tireless even after 3 days and nights of non-stop battle. The conflict was over. The Big Mom pirates had emerged victorious. One by one, returning scouts delivered their reports. News traveled fast. Even on distant Kame Island, spies gathered in stunned circles. Is it true? They whispered, disbelief on every face. And thus word spread, the era of the Big Mom pirates had truly begun. It's a shame he's been struck down by a sudden headache. After Tesla's call, Charles frowned at the news that Golden Lion Shiki had gone ill during the fight. A headache? Who's out of action? The Red Earl, leaning on his fishing rod, paused before answering. Who else but Shiki? He was leading the charge against the Sky Pirates at the Edwall naval battle, nearly wiped them out single-handedly, when a loose rudder blade caught him flush on the skull. He was knocked unconscious and ultimately bested by Charles Lingling. Charles's expression turned grave as he absorbed the report. The Red Earl shook his head. This defeat will sting Shiki more deeply than any cut. With his pride, he'll be crushed knowing he lost to you. When I saw him in Impel Prison, he was already on edge. I can't imagine how unstable he'll be once he wakes. He sighed and gave a rueful shrug. His dreams of conquering the world are probably dead now. If I were half as wise, I'd vanish somewhere remote and spend my days in peace. But with Shiki's temperament, that's simply impossible. I suppose he's already plotting his return, Charles mused, recalling Shiki's fate in the original tale. It's a shame it ended the way it did. Even the Red Earl lamented Shiki's downfall. At Navy headquarters, an emergency council was called. They'd long predicted that, once Golden Lion Shiki re-entered the New World in force, his Sky Pirates would inevitably collide with the three great powers there. And collide they did. What no one expected was Shiki's choice of allies. Rather than side with Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, or the formidable Rocks Pirates, he threw in with the Big Mom Pirates, the weakest of the trio. Everyone assumed the Big Moms would be crushed beneath Shiki's legendary might. After all, he was one of the world's most notorious captains. Yet history took a surprising turn. In previous struggles over territory, Big Mom had been driven back time and again, first by the Rocks Pirates, then by Whitebeard's fleet, leaving her the least powerful of the three. Still, Charlotte Linlin and her crew proved far more dangerous than anyone had given them credit for. Against all odds, Linlin delivered Golden Lion Shiki a decisive defeat. The Navy, caught completely off guard by this unexpected victory, scrambled to reassess the balance of their power in the New World. I'd be happy to help. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the complete passage, I'll smooth out the prose, rename Charlotte to Charles, and deliver a polished, idiomatic English version. Chapter 487, Treatment. According to the latest reports, Golden Lion Shiki's flying pirates have fully withdrawn from the New World. As for Shiki himself, there's still no sign of him. We don't know if he's alive or dead. Admiral Sora laid out the Navy's most recent intelligence on the conference table. The titanic battle unfolding in the New World had riveted the world's attention, and the Marines were no exception. At present, Sora went on, the three great pirate fleets hold uncontested sway over the New World. Our forces have no foothold there. I propose we shift our focus to sweeping the pirate threat from the Four Blues and securing the first half of the Grand Line. Admiral Tsuru placed a thick dossier in front of him. That's exactly what alarms me, she said. Ever since the breakout at Impel Down, the escapees have formed new pirate crews across the Four Blues. They're attacking shipping lanes and coastal towns with increasing boldness, far more than we ever saw after Roger's death. Coastal governments are crying out for our assistance, and our reputation is suffering as a result. She swept her gaze around the room. We can't afford to stand by. It's time to formulate our response. After days of uneasy calm, the pirates who'd escaped Impel Down finally proved just how dangerous they were. Requests for aid poured in from allied nations across the seas, and even the world government was pressing the Navy to act. The moment Charles read the dispatch, any thought of venturing into the New World vanished. There was no room for mistakes in the Four Blues. Our New World plan will have to wait, he declared. He set the orders without hesitation. Admiral Garp will sweep the East Blue, Admiral Sakazuki takes the South Blue, and Admiral Kuzan tackles the West Blue. As for the North Blue... Charles paused and glanced at Zephyr, but Zephyr sat with half-closed eyes, clearly more interested in napping than in strategic briefings. Charles sighed and turned to Crane. The North Blue's your responsibility, and while you're there, send a clear warning to the Don Quixote family. Aye, Captain Charles, Crane replied immediately, saluting crisply. As for Operation Warring States, Sora began, his gaze sharp, maintain constant surveillance on the three pirate confederations in the New World. Wait for any opportunity to sow discord. Your goal is to turn their uneasy truce into open chaos. Sora refused to abandon his designs on that lost territory. The very idea of the New World slipping from his grasp haunted him like a specter, and he burned to reclaim every inch. With each passing year, and each silver hair at his temples, the urgency grew. He did not know how many more years he would serve as Navy Admiral. If he failed to recover the New World under his command, he would go down in history as the first marshal ever to lose territory. Such a disgrace would follow him forever. "Understood, Admiral," replied Warring States with a crisp bow. He already had a solid understanding of the New World's current balance of power. On the surface, it appeared almost peaceful. The three pirate fleets largely kept to their own domains, and had even established a neutral zone at their borders to prevent accidental skirmishes. But that fragile peace masked simmering rivalries. Their last foray into the region had yielded only partial success, enough to prove that the pirates could be provoked into conflict, but not yet enough to guarantee total control. The pirate world teetered on the brink, each side watching the others for the slightest sign of weakness. The three great pirate confederacies waited impatiently who would be the first to ignite open conflict and reshape the seas. But before any of them could strike, the Rockefeller pirates blindsided both friend and foe. They lured the Navy's flagship squadrons away, then slipped through the lines to raid Impel. The blow reverberated around the globe, drowning out even the turmoil of the so-called Warring States period. The Admiralty's emergency conference had just adjourned. It had been a brief gathering, far too short for the many legendary officers who were absent at headquarters, but long enough to decide the Navy's next moves. Far from those deliberations, a shattered fleet drifted ashore on a tiny isle beyond the windless zone. This isolated outpost served as the Sky Pirates' secret base, an island Golden Lion Shiji had claimed after his retreat from open waters. In the wake of his defeat, Shiji's crews had scattered to the four winds. His lieutenant, Brother Indigo, dared not return to their former stronghold, fearing a complete encirclement by the Navy. Now Shiji himself staggered onto the beach, clutching his temples. "My head, it's killing me," he groaned, collapsing onto the hot sand. His golden mane, proud emblem of the Golden Lion, tossed wildly as he writhed, every roll a desperate attempt to ease the throbbing pain. Charles's oppressive aura exploded outward in chaotic waves, punctuated by his anguished wails. Each pulse of his power shook the deck of the flying pirate's ship, sending loose ropes and barrels clattering. No one dared approach. "Boss Charles, please calm yourself. Don't move," Indigo shouted, rushing forward with his arms outstretched. But the roar of Charles's aura drowned out his voice. Anyone who came too close risked instant death by the sword that seemed to materialize at Charles's side whenever someone breached the aura's threshold. The crew of the flying pirates backed away in terror. They weren't cowards, but they had seen dozens of comrades slain in moments like this, victims of Charles's uncontrolled wrath. Even the toughest pirates flinched at the thought of stepping within range. Indigo's heart pounded. He knew Charles was not himself. Something had snapped inside the young overlord. Then an idea struck him. "Get to my laboratory and fetch potion number 13. Hurry!" he barked to the two deckhands beside him. "Right away, sir," they cried, sprinting toward the gangplank. The moment they were gone, Indigo turned back to Charles, bracing himself for another surge of destructive energy. Time was running out, and only that mysterious potion might bring their master back from the brink. Once his men had gone, Indigo came sprinting back with a sealed vial of purple liquid in his hand. Charles caught it carefully, eyes flicking to the tight cork at its neck. "We might as well try something drastic," he muttered. "If we don't act, Boss Shiji will bleed out before long." Blood oozed from the wound on Shiji's head. Gritting his teeth, Indigo flung the vial toward him. "Who?" Despite the roar in his skull, Shiji's instincts kicked in. He swung his sword just in time to shatter the glass. The purple liquid fountained out and instantly vaporized into a swirling mist that swallowed him whole. Indigo's grin widened as the boss's muffled cries died away in the haze. "Boss, you all right?" Indigo called, leaning forward. A young boy standing nearby stared at the now motionless Shiji, then at Indigo, wide-eyed. He's unconscious?" Indigo chuckled. "That was a sleeping draught. One drop could fell an elephant. This whole vial was more than enough to knock out Boss Shiji. He stood back, triumphant, and waited for the other's reaction. Charles watched in disbelief as the bottle's contents spilled out. He'd heard that even a single drop of this potion could entrance an elephant, yet here they were, risking an entire vial at once. "Why are you just standing there?" Indigo snapped, his sharp gaze sweeping the group. "Once the fog clears, carry the boss back to the infirmary. I want to begin treatment immediately." Everyone snapped to attention. As the swirling purple mist finally dissipated, they carefully lifted Charles and bore him toward the medical wing, while Indigo hurried ahead to prepare the necessary remedies. Chapter 488, Shiji's Fury. Shiji lay sprawled on the operating table, his face occasionally contorting in pain, a grim reminder that even unconscious, he still felt the agony of a splitting headache. Fresh blood seeped from beneath the makeshift bandage around his skull, trickling steadily down the side of the table. Indigo hovered at his side, heart pounding. He met the captain's pale face and sighed. "Boss, please don't hate me for this," he muttered, lifting a pair of clippers. "I'm only doing it to save your life." With a determined breath, Indigo ground his teeth and sheared away the patch of blonde hair crowning Shiji's head. Thick tufts fell to the floor, revealing the jagged wound beneath. As the last lock of hair dropped, Indigo's claws trembled uncontrollably. The captain's nerve fibers lay bared and tightly wound around the skull's exposed ridge, far more intricate than Indigo had feared. He stepped back, fingers numb. I can't separate this mess," he stammered. "One wrong move among those delicate nerves, and Captain Shiji could die. Or worse, be driven insane." Indigo forced himself to swallow his dread. "No matter what, I've got to stop the bleeding first." Gritting his teeth, he turned his attention back to the wound. Every second counted. If he could staunch the flow of blood, there would be time to consider how best to disentangle those nerves without costing the captain his life or his mind. Carefully, Brother Indigo set to work, determined to save Shiji first and worry about the impossible task later. Shiji, the golden lion, lay motionless on the stainless steel operating table. Under the bright surgical lights, his brow slowly unfurled, and a look of calm replaced the tension in his features. Dr. Indigo released a long, shaky breath. He's going to live. Setting his scalpel aside, Indigo methodically wiped down his instruments and closed the operating room door behind him. As he stepped into the corridor, he raised his voice. "Ship doctor to the deck, status report. How is the boss?" A dozen burly sky pirates, each one a veteran of countless raids, blocked the hallway. They didn't care much for Shiji personally. What mattered was his strength. So long as the Golden Lion sailed with them, the sky pirates were untouchable. One scar-faced pirate pushed forward. "Is he out of danger?" Dr. Indigo wiped sweat from his brow. "His life's been saved. As for when he'll wake, I couldn't say. Come back tomorrow, and we'll see how he's doing." A wave of uneasy silence washed over the crew. In the last battle against Katakuri of the Big Mom pirates, 7 of their 10 senior officers had fallen. The survivors had scattered. Those few who remained here now dared not speak up. Indigo surveyed their downcast faces. "Then, what's our next move?" he asked. No one answered. The shadow of their recent losses and the uncertainty of tomorrow hung heavy in the corridor. "Everyone stay here," Indigo ordered, standing by the door of the infirmary. "Don't leave, and under no circumstances reveal our location. Wait quietly until the captain wakes." The crew exchanged puzzled glances but fell silent. Over the next few days, Captain Shiji's condition steadily improved. Finally, one morning, a sharp groan cut through the hush. "Captain! Sir Admiral!" In an instant, everyone surged forward. Shiji cracked open his eyes, the grand chandelier above swaying in his blurred vision. He tried to sit up and barked, "Give me some space. Clear the way." Indigo shoved aside the anxious sailors and knelt at Shiji's bedside. Relief washed over his face. "You're awake. I thought we'd lost you." Shiji pressed a hand to his throbbing head, wincing. He glanced around the unfamiliar room. "Where are we? Wasn't I in the middle of a duel with Charles Lingling?" Indigo's smile faded instantly. He swallowed hard. "About that, Captain. We lost the battle. You were struck by a sudden headache and collapsed. We carried you here to recover." Shiji sank back against the pillows, pain and confusion flickering in his eyes. Around him, the Cray was stood in tense silence, waiting to learn what came next. The flying pirates were thrown into utter chaos, their ranks collapsing under the onslaught of the Big Mom pirates. Indigo's voice trembled as he relayed the grim report. "What did you say?" Shiki the Golden Lion's eyes flew open, and he lurched toward his feet, only to clutch at the back of his head in agony. "Boss, you have to stay calm." Indigo rushed forward, voice urgent. "You can't let yourself get worked up. That rudder fused to your skull. If you let your emotions spike, it'll—" He swallowed hard. "It could kill you." Shiki staggered, disbelief etched across his face. "What are you talking about?" "It's the rudder's pressure on your cranial nerves," Indigo explained, wiping sweat from his brow. "Any surge of anger or stress can trigger excruciating headaches, or worse, a fatal brain hemorrhage." Shiki sank onto a nearby barrel, jaw clenched. "Is there nothing we can do?" Indigo shook his head, regret in his eyes. "Not with the medical technology we have. The only hope would be a devil fruit with extraordinary healing properties." Shiki's eyes narrowed. "Which devil fruit?" Indigo closed his eyes for a moment, weighing his words. "Mythical zoan types, perhaps, something with regenerative powers strong enough to relieve that pressure. But such fruits are rarer than legends." He glanced back at his fallen comrades, then at Shiki's strained expression. "If we can't find one, you'll have to learn to restrain your emotions. No outbursts, no matter how dire the news." Shiki forced himself to his feet, every movement careful. "Then let's hope the seas favor us, and fast." "Heh, the Operation Fruit," Indigo muttered, his mind spinning with excitement and fear. Shiji looked up, puzzled. "Operation Fruit?" "Exactly," Indigo said, forcing the words out. "It's said to cure any illness or injury in the world. Every wound, every disease, instantly healed." Shiji's expression darkened. Indigo knew he'd better not stay silent. Boss Shiji was generous to his crew, but one wrong move, or one inconvenient lie, and he'd have no hesitation slicing you in two. Swallowing hard, Indigo plunged ahead. "Boss, I don't know its exact location yet, but I promise we'll find it. We won't give up." Shiji rose to his full height, every muscle tense. A wave of dizziness washed over Indigo. Standing before him was no small thing. Then the Golden Lion's roar filled the hall. "Search for the Operation Fruit with all your strength." In that instant, Shiji's authority was absolute. The others bowed instinctively, hearts pounding, and rushed out to carry out his command. Shiji, the Golden Lion, stumbled out of the operating room, every muscle protesting. Dawn's pale light filtered through the treetops overhead. He raised his head to the sky, voice hoarse but unbowed. "No, I, the Golden Lion Shiji, will never be beaten. Roger, hear me. I will never lose." An invisible tide of domineering energy rippled outward, snapping branches and rattling the underbrush. Brother Indigo leapt forward, face etched with worry. "Boss, please, calm down." Shiji's chest heaved. At Indigo's plea, his fury flickered but then subsided. He turned away, jaw clenched, and sank onto the grass. "Humph," he muttered, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. At that moment, a dark blur fell from the sky and landed with a soft thud at Shiji's feet, a small bundle of newspapers, apparently dropped by a passing vendor. Wide-eyed, Shiji picked them up and smoothed the pages. Then, with a strangled cry, he froze. The front-page headline stabbed at him in bold print. "Charles Lingling, you deserve to die." Blood roared in Shiji's ears. For a long, suspended second, he sat motionless, every thought grinding to a halt. Then his limbs gave way, and he collapsed back onto the grass, the newspaper crumpled in his grasp. Indigo rushed to his side, peering anxiously at the headline. He swallowed hard, unable to tear his eyes away from the damning words. What had Charles Lingling done? And why did someone now openly call for his death? The Sky Pirates were utterly annihilated. Golden Lion Shiji staggered, clutching his head as a sudden, searing pain washed over him. In the aftermath, it was the Big Mom pirates who stood unchallenged, claiming complete and total victory. Chapter 489, Kotor Lao Lei. Charles stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the crumpled newspaper at his feet and on Boss Shiki, who lay slumped in a faint. "Boss!" he called, dropping the paper and rushing forward. He scooped Shiki into his arms and sprinted back to the infirmary. Lantern light danced over shaken walls as Charles laid him on a cot and pressed a hand to his brow. Minutes passed in frantic checks of pulse and breathing. Then, Shiki's eyelids fluttered open. He lay silent for a heartbeat, staring up at the ceiling as if it held all the answers, and none of them good. Finally, his voice came in a hollow whisper. Charles, am I a failure? Charles's chest tightened. This was not the Golden Lion he knew, the pirate lord who once thundered across the Grand Line with vows to outshine even Roger, the pirate king. He crouched beside the bed and gripped Shiki's shoulder. How could you even ask that? You are Shiki the Golden Lion, the man destined to surpass Roger, to stand at the very summit of the sea. Dominate the world, he added, forcing a reassuring smile. That was always your dream, and it still is. You have not failed. The familiar words, dominate the world, stirred something deep in Shiki's mind. He closed his eyes and drifted back 20 years, to the blazing ambition of his youth. When had he begun to falter? Was it in the darkness of Impel Down, chained in that prison's depths? No, it couldn't have been then. Or was it on the deck of Marineford, standing alone against the full might of the Navy? No, that was courage, not doubt. Perhaps it crept in when his emissary to Roger was turned away, and his entire fleet was crushed. When every plan he'd ever made lay in ruins. Shiki's breath caught. He opened his eyes and met Charles's unwavering gaze. For the first time since he awoke, there was a spark, a faint flicker of the lion's fire. Charles squeezed his hand. You're still here, he said quietly, and so is that ambition. We'll rebuild, one step at a time. Shiki nodded slowly, as if finding his strength again. The road ahead would be long, but with Charles at his side, the Golden Lion was ready to roar once more. Charles's roar echoed through the infirmary as he woke to a crushing realization. He was utterly powerless, like a wounded dog. A crude control device was embedded in his skull, forcing his body to obey commands and robbing him of all dignity. Charles, the name tasted bitter on his tongue. His lifelong nemesis had engineered this downfall, leaving him humiliated beyond measure. A violent cough seized him, rattling his ribs. Indigo, his loyal lieutenant, stooped to steady him. Boss, please, you're hurting yourself. Breathe. Charles forced himself to calm down, channeling his fury into controlled breathing. Indigo gave a relieved nod and slipped out into the corridor, concern etched on her face. The infirmary doors closed with a soft hiss, and silence fell. Beyond these walls, the new world was abuzz. Rumors had already spread that Charles Lingling, the upstart adventurer, had defeated the mighty Golden Lion Shiji. For over 2 decades, Shiji had ruled the seas unchallenged. His loss to a single opponent was unthinkable. Every fleet commander, pirate lord, and royal governor reeled at the news. If the venerable Golden Lion could be bested, the entire power structure teetered on the brink of collapse. As alliances shifted and old stars fell, one burning question remained. Who would seize the throne left vacant by Shiji's defeat? He is the pirate king, and until now nobody thought it disgraceful to fall to his hand. He alone had stormed Navy headquarters and taken on Admiral Sengoku and the hero Garp in a 3-day, 3-night duel. And still, when they finally subdued and arrested him, the world merely shrugged. After all, to lose against the combined might of a fleet admiral and a legendary marine hero was no shame. The Golden Lion Shiji remained a living legend in everyone's eyes. But today's news shattered that belief. Shiji had been defeated. Worse still, by Charlotte Linlin, a pirate that endured countless setbacks during the Age of Exploration. The brawny lion who once ruled the seas was toppled by a woman the world had long written off. If the man known as the Golden Lion could fall, then perhaps he was not as invincible as legend claimed. On the Chambord Islands, Silvers Rayleigh sat outside a waterfront tavern, a tattered newspaper spread on the table before him. His eyes flicked over the headlines before he exhaled, heavy with resignation. Not even Shiji could pull it off, he murmured to himself. It was both a sigh for his old comrade and a lament for the passing of time. Rayleigh absently brushed a hand through hair that had once gleamed gold but was now shot through with gray. The disbanding of the Roger Pirates had been the first blow to his heart. This latest defeat felt like salt rubbed into the wound. Despite his usual stoicism, Rayleigh's rapidly graying hair gave away his grief. The dissolution of the Roger Pirates and Roger's death had struck him harder than he let on. That morning, he sat hunched over a mug of sake in Shiachi's tavern, lost in thought. "Old man, stop sighing!" Shiachi called from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed. "You come here every day to eat and drink for free, and you won't even pay or lift a finger. How about washing the dishes for once?" Rayleigh bristled, flushing with indignation. "Me, washing dishes? I'm Pluto the Mighty. Tell me, would Pluto scrub pots? He slammed his cup down, drained the last drop of sake, and stood. Fine, I'll go earn my keep somewhere else. He pulled his worn straw hat low over his eyes and stepped out into the busy streets of Shampoo Island. The riot of lanterns overhead, the scent of street food, even the distant explosions of fireworks, all of it chased the gloom from his heart. He wandered past colorful stalls until he stood before auction house number, its grand white facade looming above. Rayleigh paused, his pulse quickening. After a breath, he slipped around to the alley beside the auction house. A burly slave trader blocked his path, arms folded, disbelief etched on his face. You want to sell yourself? The trader asked, voice rough with surprise. Rayleigh straightened, lifting his chin. A crooked smile played on his lips. Isn't my life worth something? Let's find out what the world thinks. With that, the former Roger pirate resolved to gamble on his own future once more. Charles grasped the 40 Bailey's coins in his hand, the rough metal cool against his palm. 40 Baileys, the trader said with a shrug. Not bad for someone your age. Before Charles could object, the old iron slave collar clicked around his neck, marking him as the property of the highest bidder. In that instant, his life changed forever. Hours later, Charles stepped out of the auction house, jingling a small pouch of freshly earned Baileys. He counted them twice, 80 in total. He tucked the pouch into his coat and muttered, I can't believe someone paid 80 for an old man like me. Lucky break, but you can't rely on windfalls every day. Time to find a real job. He made his way down to the docks, where a squad of coders was working on a merchant ship. Thick brushes slid rhythmically across the hull, laying down the protective compounds that kept these vessels seaworthy. Coders were said to earn more in a week than most laborers did in a month. No wonder everyone on Chambord Island wanted in. Charles's pulse quickened. He approached the foreman, offered his collar as proof of his hire, and signed on the spot. Over the next hours, he soaked up the foreman's instructions, the correct ratios of pigment to resin, the ideal brushstrokes to ensure an even layer, the subtle techniques that prevented peeling. By sunset, he was mixing paint like a veteran. That evening, he slipped back into Shaq's rip-off bar and settled onto a familiar stool. Haki, a wiry man with a perpetual cigarette hanging from his lip, looked up. Well, if it isn't the infamous Pluto, Haki drawled. Back so soon? Did you make your fortune? Charles let out a low chuckle and shook his head. Not exactly, he said, sliding the pouch of Baileys across the counter. Turns out being a middleman in collars isn't sustainable. I signed on as a coder today. Best pay I've seen down here. Shiachi, lounging nearby, raised an eyebrow. Coders? With my brain and a brush, I'll do just fine, Charles replied, nodding confidently. He felt lighter than he had in weeks. No more hiding in alleyways, no more dodging debt collectors. Just honest work, honest pay, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Haki cracked a grin and poured him a drink. Then welcome back, Pluto. Let's see what that coder can pull off at first light. Charles lifted the glass in a quiet toast. Tomorrow, he'd prove he was worth every coin the foreman had invested. And this time, he'd build a future he could keep. Rayleigh leaned back in his creaking chair and produced a weathered satchel from his belt. With one swift motion, Yuki set it on the scarred table between them. Shiachi's eyes glinted as she lunged for it, upending the bag to reveal neat stacks of bills. 80 million berries? She breathed, counting them aloud. Are you really planning a robbery for this? Rayleigh gave a self-deprecating chuckle. Robbery? Hardly. This is Navy territory. I'd be a fool to pull that off here. I simply signed up with the auction house. The lady who snapped my picture took pity and let me walk away with the lot. Shiachi snorted as she tucked the money back into the satchel. Even if that's true, this sum barely covers half a month's rent. Charles leaned forward, folding his arms on the table. Speaking of announcements, have you seen the papers? Lingling's declaration has gone viral. At the mention of her name, Rayleigh's expression softened into a nostalgic smile. He picked up a crumpled newspaper clipping from the floor. Lingling was the only female officer in the Old Rocks Pirates, he said quietly. You two have history, back when she still had that wide-eyed innocence about her. Shiachi gathered the scattered broadsheets and passed them to Charles. People change, she mused, but some things, like her ambition, only grow stronger. Charles scanned the headlines, a spark of anticipation in his eyes. I can't wait to see just how much stronger. Rayleigh raised his chipped mug of watered-down rum. To Lingling, he toasted. May she surprise us all. They clinked mugs, the glow of possibility crackling between them as the old tavern door swung open once more. Chapter 490. It was the year 1503 by the sea's lunar calendar, and 3 years had slipped by in the blink of an eye. Yet the new world was as turbulent as ever. Pirates from every corner of the globe poured into its waters, mounting relentless assaults on the 3 great pirate emperors who ruled those seas like monarchs. To these titans, any bold challenger was nothing more than a provocation, one they gladly let their underlings handle. Time and again, their subordinates delivered crushing defeats, leaving the emperor's reputations unblemished. Since his spectacular loss, the Golden Lion Shiki had vanished from public view. Most assumed he'd withdrawn from the race for supremacy, his ambitions drifting away like a ghost ship. Rumors even swirled that the Sky Pirates had reappeared in the East Blue, though no one could say for sure if those whispers held any truth. What was beyond doubt was that the legendary marine hero Monkey D. Garp had been making increasingly frequent returns to the East Blue. Time and again over these past 3 years, he'd reappeared in the East China Sea, today being no exception. At the helm of his ship, Garp leaned on the rail, clad in his trademark red floral shirt, scanning the horizon with that familiar, easy confidence. Garp cradled the baby in his arms and pulled a ridiculous face. The infant answered with a giggle like a silver bell. Grandpa, you'll turn me into the greatest marine ever. Garp's heart swelled. His unreliable son had dropped by out of the blue, placing this little boy in his arms and calling him grandson. At first he'd been startled, then overjoyed. Lifting the baby high, he set off for his home in Windmill Village. Far to the north, a vast fleet cut through the open sea. Crimson and white flags snapped in the wind, announcing the presence of the Buggy Pirates. For 2 years, Captain Buggy and his crew had terrorized these waters, and today's target was a sleepy coastal town lying just ahead. Listen up, you mangy rats. Buggy boomed from the bow, throwing his head back in raucous laughter. Show them what happens to anyone who dares stand in our way. Captain Buggy, the pirates roared in unison, brandishing cutlasses and pikes. Clad in his trademark red and white clown hat and draped in a sweeping scarlet cloak, held aloft by his chop-chop fruit powers, Buggy's usual humility had vanished. His wild grin stretched from ear to ear as he leaned forward, hair tumbling over his shoulders, ready to unleash mayhem on the unsuspecting villagers below. A colossal figure towered nearly 8 meters above the deck, so immense that even the world's greatest swordsman, Hawkeye Mihawk, and the cunning ex-warlord Crocodile at his side seemed almost diminutive by comparison. They watched the distant fight with cool detachment, their expressions betraying nothing more than mild curiosity. Not far off drifted the Buggy Pirates' battered ship, its once proud sails tattered and its crew too weary or wounded to stand. Abruptly, a thunderous volley of cannon fire shattered the afternoon calm, rattling planks and sending splinters skittering across the decks. In an instant, every pirate sprang to his feet, weapons drawn, senses on high alert. First Mate Beckman, broad-shouldered, steely-eyed, and ever-composed, snatched up his spyglass and swept the horizon. "Captain," he called, voice steady, "there's a small town ahead under pirate attack. Flames everywhere." At his side, the scarlet-haired captain in the iconic straw hat leaned forward, eyes alight with eager anticipation. "Pirates, you say? Excellent. We'll sail in and see what trouble they've gotten themselves into." Beckman hesitated, remembering the ferocity of that shoreline fight. "The last time we interfered there, the enemy nearly overwhelmed us. This battle looks every bit as brutal." Shanks cracked a grin and clapped his first mate on the shoulder. "Then we'll give them a show they won't forget. Helm, set our course!" With another echoing boom in the distance, the red-haired captain seized the wheel. The deck sprang into action as their ship angled toward the rising smoke and flickering torches of the besieged town, ready to turn the tide once more. The moment the dreadlocked sailor spoke up, "With the captain's method, we won't drift sideways in the North Sea," there was an odd edge to his laughter. "All right then," he added, still smiling. Beckman, standing nearby, felt a sudden chill. Something wasn't right. He strained his eyes toward the horizon, and his heart sank. Dozens of pirate ships cut through the waves, bearing down on them. The man with the dreadlocks went stiff, and the rest of the crew tensed at once. Surrounded by that many pirate vessels, any sailor would be on edge. Yet one of them couldn't contain his excitement. "Captain, what's happening?" Beckman noticed the captain acting strangely and moved closer. "Sir, is everything all right?" he asked quietly. Their captain said nothing more. With a single, fluid motion, he climbed up onto the bow and raised his arm. "Hey, Bucky," he bellowed across the water. "It's me, Shanks!" From the flagship in the distance, Bucky's face lit up. He rattled off the news over a trumpet. "Captain Bucky, a pirate fleet is closing in on us from behind. It's the red-haired pirates you told us to watch for." A young deckhand staggered back, wide-eyed. "What? What did you say, Shanks? The red-haired pirates?" At once, Bucky's expression sharpened. He turned to the horizon, where a lone, battered sloop bobbed on the waves, and the steely authority he'd honed through countless drills flared to life. "Ha! It really is them. Shanks and his crew. Men, set a course for the red-haired pirates." His voice crackled with excitement. "Aye, Captain Bucky." Right then, the crew abandoned the cannonballs they'd been polishing and hurried to their stations, guiding the fleet toward the distant ships. As they drew near, a peculiar scene came into view. On one side, 60 or maybe 70 formidable pirate vessels. On the other, that single ragged sloop. Both forces hung suspended, locked in a silent standoff. Shanks squinted at the unusual tableau. Beside him, the ship's hefty cook, chicken drumsticks still in hand, waddled up and whispered, "Cap'n, are you sure about this? No looting again, right?" Since joining Shanks's crew, he'd steadfastly refused every opportunity to plunder, and the pirates' coffers had grown emptier by the day. The cook glanced nervously at the distant ships, grease glistening on his fingers. Shanks cracked a grin, clapped the cook on the back, and said, "Relax, I've got it under control." The cook swallowed hard but managed a nod. As the two sides drifted closer, a tense hush fell over the sea. Any moment now, the first move would be made. "Someday we'll have a fleet this big," Shanks said with a casual grin, still carefully frosting a pie for his crew. A sudden shout cut through the bustle of the deck. "Shanks!" A familiar youngster came sprinting forward. "Bucky!" Shanks tipped his straw hat, surprise flickering in his eyes. It had been 5 years since the captain's execution, 5 years in which he'd almost stopped hoping to see Bucky again. Every newspaper since then had tracked the rise of the Bucky pirates. Once a nobody crew, now a supernova force in the pirate world, yet still struggling to recruit new hands. "Shanks, it's been too long!" Bucky cried, reaching the bow and taking in the older, more confident man before him. Shanks smiled and gestured to the armada of 70, or was it 80, ships surrounding them. "Long time no see, Bucky. You've done well for yourself." Bucky folded his arms, a dark spark in his eyes. "You've grown up pretty nice looking yourself, red-haired. But why are you here? Have you forgotten that I still hate you?" Shanks blinked, caught off guard. "Hate me? I don't play dumb," Bucky snapped. "You know exactly what I mean. That accident that killed our captain." Shanks ran a hand through his hair, an embarrassed chuckle escaping him. "Believe me, that was just bad luck," Bucky snarled. "Your apology means nothing to me. Asshole. Kids, take Shanks down." With that, he hurled the throwing knife straight at Shanks. Chapter 491, The Three Emperors. In the blink of an eye, the entire mood aboard the Sly Fox shifted. Bucky pirates scrambled to their cannon stations. The clatter of loading shot echoing through the decks. Shanks's brow darkened as he surveyed the sudden readiness around him. "Bucky, what are you up to?" he shouted. Bucky rolled up his sleeves, a low laugh rumbling in his chest. "You lot are about to learn what my iron fist can do," he said, stepping back as his crew opened fire. Cannonballs tore across the water toward the red-haired pirates in a deadly arc. Explosions rocked the sea around them, wood splintered, water sprayed, and smoke curled into the sky. Shanks drew his sword in a flash, using it to deflect shrapnel and protect his men. On the quarterdeck, Myhawk, leaning casually against the railing, narrowed his eyes at the chaos. "Captain," he asked with mild curiosity, "isn't that your protege? Why would he turn his cannons on us?" Shanks exchanged a bewildered glance with his crew. Moments ago, they'd been joking with Bucky. Now they were under fire. He scratched the back of his head and barked at his first mate, Beckman. "Fall back! Get out of his line of fire. Beckman's face went ashen. Captain, we can't. He's too strong. Realizing the danger, Shanks roared, Bucky, cease fire this instant, or I swear I'll— But Bucky only laughed again, the grin on his face dark and unyielding, as he prepared for another salvo. Shanks felt a flicker of dread. Whatever had driven Bucky to turn on his family, it would take everything they had to stop him now. I'll hang you up and whip you. Captain Bucky's roar echoed across the deck as he watched Shanks's silhouette grow smaller on the horizon. Teeth bared, he bellowed, Men, after them! Take no prisoners. Aye, Captain Bucky. At his command, the Bucky pirates leapt into action. Over 20 officers barked orders to their crews, and the fleet surged forward in pursuit of the red-haired pirates. At the Beihai Naval Base in North Blue, Lieutenant Crane stared in disbelief at the message in his hands. 2 Roger pirates at odds with each other? He frowned. What's going on here? Beside him, Marine Lieutenant Coral Swift, her pink leggings and navy blue justice cloak, a sharp contrast to the bustling command center, arched an eyebrow. Disputes among pirate crews aren't exactly rare, Crane. Want me to dispatch a unit? Coral's hand drifted to the sword at her side. Crane paused, then shook his head. No. Rear Admiral Peach Rabbit summoned me about an important reassignment. This personal squabble can resolve itself. For now, we stay out of it. Turning back to the reports, he masked his curiosity as Coral merely nodded. Outside, the distant crash of cannon fire marked the start of another high-seas chase between 2 of the world's most feared pirate crews. Chapter 7. Turmoil in the North Sea. The Don Quixote family has become our single greatest headache, Admiral Peach Rabbit growled, tapping the latest bounty poster against the table. In bold letters, it announced a staggering reward for Charles, mastermind arms dealer and head of the family, his trademark mocking grin staring back at them. He's provoking wars between nations and flooding the North Sea with illegal weapons. As long as he's at large, peace here is impossible. Lieutenant North Sea sifted through the piles of classified dossiers they'd compiled over the past 3 years. Tracking their shipments has been a nightmare. Every time we think we've found a trail, it goes cold. Peach Rabbit slammed his fist lightly on the map-strewn table. We will catch him. Be patient. On a secluded fortress island somewhere in the North Sea, Charles reclined behind an ornate mahogany desk, a delicate porcelain cup of tea resting in his hand. His posture was the very picture of calm indifference, hardly the demeanor of a criminal on the run. A soft knock announced the arrival of Diamante, his most trusted lieutenant. She entered and bowed, face drawn. Young master, I'm afraid another weapons shipment. Tea was seized by the Navy last night. Charles set down his cup with a quiet clink. 3 years, and they still haven't given up? How tenacious. Diamante hesitated, then continued. If this continues, we risk crippling our supply lines. Our clients won't tolerate further delays. He tilted his head, steepling his fingers. Then double our escorts and reroute future cargo through the misty channel. Let them chase ghosts while we move in the shadows. Diamante's shoulders eased. Understood, young master. Charles leaned back, eyes alight with calculated confidence. Through the window, the ocean's restless waves glinted under a pale moon. Across those waters, the world government tightened its net, but Charles, ever 3 steps ahead, merely plotted his next strike. Doflamingo's eyes flicked to the Navy warship dogging Diamante's heels. A cruel smile twisted his lips. Well, if it isn't the Navy Chief of Staff on our tail, he taunted, the promise of violence glinting in his stare. Good boy. You do well to sharpen your wits. At that moment, Vice Admiral Crane appeared on deck, flanked by the submarine Peach Rabbit. Startled, Diamante bowed her head, cheeks burning. Pardon me, young master, she murmured. I didn't notice the Navy ship sneaking up on us. She blamed herself fiercely, but Doflamingo shook his head, laughter rumbling from his chest. No need to apologize. Your family. Being spotted changes nothing. Let's move. He harbored no desire to tangle with Crane again. 3 years ago, his arrogance had nearly cost him his life at the Admiral's hands. Only a last-second clone trick had saved him from defeat. Now, he was content to slip away. Understood, Diamante called. With a deft motion, she urged their vessel forward, leaving the island and the pursuing warship far behind. In the next heartbeat, the isle detonated in a deafening roar. When the smoke cleared, Doflamingo and his crew had already vanished. "Hey!" shouted a voice in the distance, but it was far too late. "This Doflamingo is as slippery as ever." Aboard the warship, General He stood at the railing, staring at the island now reduced to a smoldering ruin. He exhaled slowly. "Shall we keep pursuing him?" Peach Rabbit shook his head. "No, if we fail again, Doflamingo will only become more cautious, and he'll vanish before we know it. It's better to fall back to headquarters. Our forces are overstretched." Crane folded his arms in agreement, and Peach Rabbit cast one last, reluctant glance at the rising plume of ash before turning away. Back at Navy headquarters, the atmosphere crackled with renewed confidence. With full backing from the world government and a constant influx of top recruits fresh from the training camp, the Navy had reshaped itself over the past 3 years into an unprecedented fighting force. On the central parade ground, Fleet Admiral Kong inspected his officers' proud faces as they stood in perfect formation. Beneath his calm exterior, a new resolve was forming. 5 years had passed since Roger's death, a half-decade of uneasy calm that had quelled most would-be pirates. Now, Kong thought, it was time to strike the new world. The map of the seas lay before him, and at last, the Navy would move to reclaim it. The world government's grip on the seas has loosened more than anyone ever expected. With the major threats in the East, South, and North Seas under control, the Navy has finally mustered enough strength to turn its attention to the New World. There, 3 pirate fleets reign supreme: the Whitebeard pirates, the Rockefeller pirates, and the Big Mom pirates, each claiming vast territories as if they were emperors themselves. Their dominance has swept countless lesser crews into obscurity. All across the Grand Line, sailors now whisper of this new era, the age of the 3 emperors. Every pirate who ventures into the New World must make a choice: allegiance to one of these 3 mighty fleets or the perilous independence of charting their own course. But even the loneliest captains who dare to sail the 4 gaps between Keel Islands, Teardrop Island, and Sandwich Isle discover there is nothing peaceful about those so-called neutral waters. Scraps for territory flare up into pitched battles every day, as aspiring buccaneers fight over the scraps left unclaimed by the great powers. After 5 brutal years of conflict, only 5 pirate crews have emerged as true challengers to the 3 emperors. Among them stands Moonlight Moria and his Moria pirates, the lone heroes of the West Sea. Where once sat tranquil ports and quiet coves, now Moria's shadow looms large, a warning to any who would underestimate him. And so the New World spins on, its balance of power fragile, its waters stained by ambition and blood. Yet for every captain who falls, another rises, hunger for fame and freedom driving even the most desperate souls toward that final, impossible dream: to topple an emperor and carve out a kingdom of their own. When Charles first sailed into the New World a few years ago, he'd barely set foot ashore before Admiral Sengoku's forces drove him off. An abrupt lesson in marine territorial authority. Since that humiliating encounter, Charles has had no choice but to press ever deeper into the New World's uncharted waters, testing himself against the era's greatest pirate crews in a bid to carve out his own place on the high seas. Chapter 492, The 3 Emperors. In just 3 years, Charles had rallied tens of thousands of pirates and uselessly harried the 3 emperors. From the start, he set his sights on the Rockefeller pirates as his chief rival. Brimming with confidence, he deliberately targeted the New World's 2 strongest fleets, the Iron Wall pirates and the Rockefeller pirates. Through these bold strikes, the Charles pirates rose to become the closest force to the emperors among the 5 great armadas, earning him the legendary sobriquet, 4th Emperor. The other 4 major pirate groups were a distant second. Most had attempted, and failed, to challenge the emperors, only to be driven back into the volatile no-man's land wedged between the great powers. There, they eked out a living by preying on fresh-faced rookies, a scenario the 3 emperors were more than happy to encourage. After all, who would rather face a genuine threat when you can let inexperience run wild on the fringes? Now, deep within the Rockefeller pirate sphere of influence, Charles's fleet readied itself for the next phase. "Huh? Man, I'm so sleepy," a bleary-eyed lookout mumbled, blinking into the pre-dawn light. "Can I take a nap first?" Caesar asked, leaning against the rail as he gazed out over the endless expanse of ocean. They were aboard the Rockefeller pirates' flagship, sailing through these waters on official orders. Since Charles, known until now as Charlotte, had raised the tariffs in the New World, smuggling had surged. It fell to the Rockefeller pirates to patrol these routes and warn any merchants tempted to cheat the system. Originally, Caesar's older sister Esdeth had overseen these patrols herself, and she seemed to enjoy the work. But fate had other plans. Barely a week ago, Esdeth had come to blows with Katakuri of the Big Mom pirates over control of a small but strategically vital island. The skirmish had stretched into its third grueling day, tensions mounting with every cannon blast. Across the New World, every crew was on edge. Whispers spread that a full-scale war between the Rockefeller pirates and the Big Mom pirates was inevitable. Even Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, the Yonko known for his calm judgment, had begun to fret. His reasoning was simple. If the Rockefeller pirates managed to shatter Big Mom's fleet, their next target would almost certainly be the Whitebeard pirates. Caesar rubbed his eyes and stretched. "Seriously, can't I sleep for just a few hours?" he repeated, half to himself. Around him, the crew moved with measured discipline. They knew the stakes were higher than ever. With Esdeth locked in deadly combat and the eyes of the entire New World watching, the Rockefeller pirates needed every ounce of focus, and maybe, just maybe, a well-rested captain. In this era, the once impenetrable reputation of the Whitebeard pirates has begun to fade, their claim to the world's top pirate crew usurped by the Rockefeller pirates. Yet the title of world's strongest man still belongs to one individual, the man who wields the quake fruit, whose power to lay waste to islands is without equal. No one ever imagined that Rockefeller Charles could stand against, and even prevail over, Whitebeard Edward Newgate. Whitebeard himself feared no battle, but when he dwelled on his own sons and compared them to Charles's growing legion of formidable lieutenants, a pang of doubt set in. Apart from Marco, Josie, and Bista, he realized with regret that the Whitebeard pirates had few true heavy hitters left. In an all-out war, Whitebeard might handle Charles, Marco, Josie, and Bista single-handedly, and even fend off foes like Esdeth, Caesar, and Tesla, but then there was Barrett, whose strength rivaled his own. And the Rockefeller pirates boasted more than just Barrett's imperial-level might. Whispers spoke of the mysterious Red Earl, who spent his days fishing with Charles on Charles's private island. Would the Red Earl join Charles when the war finally broke out? No one could say for sure. In addition to Big Mom's three most celebrated offspring, several other children within her brood have quietly built reputations of their own. They may not shine as brightly as the famous trio, but each is a formidable fighter in his or her own right. Whitebeard, however, came to a grim realization. Should war break out, he would almost certainly be defeated, or, at best, win at the cost of annihilating his entire pirate family. With that in mind, he put a swift end to any talk among his crew of launching assaults against the Rockefeller pirates or the Big Mom pirates. Though many of his sons and daughters grumbled at the sudden peace policy, Whitebeard stood firm. He even went so far as to cultivate a friendly facade toward the Big Mom pirates. To Big Mom Linlin herself, preoccupied as she always was with cakes and confections, there was nothing more than polite courtesy in his overtures. But her children, especially Katakuri, understood the real strategy at play. Behind closed doors, they explained to her that by keeping all three great pirate factions in a state of mutual tension, no one dared make the first move. The Whitebeard and Big Mom forces thus cast a watchful eye over the Rockefeller pirates, creating an unspoken deterrent. And though Linlin's mind was often elsewhere, she was far from blind. She could feel the balance of power shifting, and she knew exactly why Whitebeard was smiling so amiably. Charles had no choice but to swallow his frustration and let it go. He ordered his crew to stand down and avoid any provocations, but to his dismay, his command carried no weight with his own offspring. A cabal of headstrong youths, led by the relentless Esth, had slipped into open rebellion and were itching for a fight with the Big Mom pirates. Anyone who studied a map of the New World could see why. Big Mom's territory formed a stranglehold around the Rockefeller pirates' heartland, threatening to choke off their influence at every turn. Undeterred by orders or warnings, Esdeth and his followers deployed themselves along the border each day, looking for the smallest excuse to spark a skirmish. Charles felt his authority slipping through his fingers. These were children he had raised himself, yet now they acted as though they answered to no one. He had always thought Caesar was his only problem. Headstrong, yes, but manageable. He never imagined the real troublemaker would be Esdeath. Once a sweet, endearing boy, then a cold, inscrutable adolescent, and now a fully grown radical whose audacity gave Charles a never-ending headache. Charles watched Caesar with a mixture of amusement and relief. The younger man could be lazy at times, but he never stirred up real trouble, and that was more than comforting to someone carrying as heavy a reputation as Charles did. Lately, he'd been enjoying the same respect and deference that Whitebeard commanded years ago. All that stood between him and absolute dominance on the seas was whether he could keep the lesser captains in line. "Master, smuggling vessel spotted ahead!" came the urgent cry from the lead ship's crow's nest. Caesar, who had been dozing on deck, stirred at the sound. With a languid sigh, he lifted the blindfold from his eyes and peered up at the lookout. "What's her name?" he asked in a half-hearted drawl. The lookout squinted against the rising sun. As the strange ship drew nearer, the flag became unmistakable, and his face went pale. "Young master, it's the Moria pirates, Moonlight Moria." The Moria pirates were no small fry. Aside from the Rockefeller fleet itself, no crew had as much notoriety or commanded as much fear on the Grand Line. Even the Rockefeller captains, known for their rivalries with one another, united in treating Moonlight Moria as a serious threat. This was a pirate crew unlike any other they'd faced before, and now they were closing fast. Charles rose to his feet. The real test of his reputation was about to begin. As soon as the pirate fleets from every corner of the globe plunged into the New World, they charged headlong at the territories of the three emperors, clamoring to claim our crowns. One by one, they were cut down and sent to the ocean's depths, all but the Moria pirates. Despite suffering a crushing naval assault as they entered, the Moria pirates refused to break. They regrouped quickly and struck back without hesitation, raiding rival crews, absorbing their strength, and steadily carving out new territory. With each victory, their power swelled, and before long, they had forged themselves into a force no one could ignore. Chapter 493, Smuggling. Parading under the Moria pirates' banner, a small fleet had brazenly sailed straight into Rockefeller territory, an unmistakable provocation. The Rockefeller pirates were famous for their loose policy. So long as no one trespassed on their waters, they let outsiders wreak havoc elsewhere. But this was different. Caesar's lazy grin vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare. Though laid back by reputation, he brooked no disrespect. His fearsome title, Demon Dragon Caesar, might once have been a misnomer. Today, his fury was all too real. "You've got some nerve," he drawled, voice as sharp as broken glass. "Declaring war on the Rockefeller pirates, are you?" He watched the three enemy ships steadily closing the distance. "Tell me, do you truly believe you can stand against one of the four emperors?" A lieutenant at his side cleared his throat. "Captain, shall we hoist our standard and demand their surrender?" Caesar's lips curled into a thin, menacing smile. "By all means, let's give them this courtesy, then remind them why challenging an emperor is the gravest mistake any pirate can make." "This will make everyone think we don't follow the rules," Caesar warned, his eyes flashing with sudden steel. Gone was his usual light-hearted air. At once, the deputy nodded subtly, gesturing to the flagman. The flagman ran forward, hoisting the signal flags that fluttered out across the water to the opposite fleet, and even reached the distant Moria pirates. Of Moria's armada, only 3 ships still flew his black standard. Moria himself was nowhere in sight. Captain Logue, a breathless sailor, hurried up to the bow. "The Rockefeller pirates out there have raised their banners. They're demanding to know what we're doing here." Captain Logue stood with one foot up on the rail, staring at the approaching fleet with open contempt. "What's it to them? I answer only to Lord Moria. What could the Rockefellers possibly do to me? Tell them to mind their own business." With that, he waved a dismissive hand. The lookout lowered his flags, and Logue gave the order to set sail again. Their mission was clear: secure a fresh consignment of weapons from the Dark Realm's rulers and deliver them safely back to the Moria pirates' stronghold. With nearly every sea lane in the New World under the 3 emperors' control, Charles devised a daring solution to shore up their war-drained treasury. He ordered customs checkpoints at every strategic strait and shipping lane, taxing every merchant vessel that passed through. The prolonged conflict had bled their coffers dry, and even Charles's personal fortune wasn't enough to keep shipyards busy, crews supplied, and mercenaries paid. By imposing tariffs, the emperors could generate a steady stream of revenue, exactly what they desperately needed. Caught between the barrel of the Rockefeller pirates' guns and the need to turn a profit, independent traders and resellers quickly found themselves with no choice. Under threat of force, they grudgingly paid the new dues. Even merchant vessels flying under the banners of Whitebeard and Big Mom bent to the policy, handing over their tariffs lest they risk confrontation. Watching the gold pour into Charles's coffers, Whitebeard and Big Mom exchanged knowing looks. If Charles can tax the sea, they remarked, so can we. In short order, all three emperors entrenched themselves across the New World with their own networks of toll stations, each exacting fees from passing ships. What began as Charles's bold wartime expedient soon became a standard and highly profitable practice across their domains. Merchants sailing under the banners of the great pirate lords scarcely batted an eye. Only those without such powerful patrons ever came to grief. And that was just the beginning. Once the three emperors began demanding their own tariffs, every smaller pirate band caught between their territories followed suit. Whenever one of these crews seized an island, they promptly slapped taxes on every merchant vessel passing through. Lacking any real subtlety, the little pirates dashed at every fat target, snatching cargo and coin with no regard for commerce or courtesy. Even well-organized outfits like the Moria pirates, who relied on outside ports to restock provisions, found themselves fleeced at every turn. Under the shadow of the three emperors' fleets, smuggling became the only dependable way to move goods. Traders quickly learned that it was safer to enter imperial waters than to rely on the so-called peaceful zones. At worst, an imperial patrol might confiscate contraband and issue a fine, far more predictable than the outright plunder dealt out by those petty pirates. Smugglers had always thrived in the shadows of the three emperors, but nowhere more so than in the Rockefeller pirates' territory. There, contraband moved openly, and fortunes were made on every tide. Seeing an opportunity, Charles issued a bold new decree. Any vessel wishing to sail those waters must pay a toll. For a mere 100 million Baileys, a ship would receive an official Rockefeller pirate flag, valid for 1 month. Under its colors, no navy or rival pirate dared to strike. Almost overnight, Rockefeller coffers swelled. Shrewd merchants, never ones to pass up guaranteed protection, lined up to register. And in a world perpetually on the brink of war, demands soared. Wherever conflict flared, supplies ran short. Grain, weapons, medicine, goods became gold, and ships bearing the Rockefeller flag appeared on every horizon, laden with everything armies and civilians suddenly needed. This surge of legitimate and highly profitable trade reshaped the pirate alliances. Factions that once plotted to overthrow the three emperors found themselves checked by Rockefeller's growing power. Even the feared Moria pirates held their fire, unwilling to disrupt a system so durable and so lucratively engineered. In the New World's ever-shifting balance of power, Charles's toll strategy had struck a decisive blow in Rockefeller's favor. Since the warring states' upheaval hurled him into the very heart of the New World, Charles, better known by his epithet, Moonlight Moria, has been battling almost without pause. Never one to settle for scraps, he spent every waking moment absorbing weaker crews, determined to close the gap between himself and the mighty emperors who rule vast swathes of these seas. Don't mistake his caution for timidity. Though he was thrust into this maelstrom by forces beyond his control, Charles has never let go of his dream of becoming pirate king. He fully understands, however, that a direct assault on the four emperors right now would be suicide. Their territories and resources far outstrip his own. So instead of charging headlong into impossible battles, he has pursued a more patient strategy: forge alliances with minor pirate bands, one after another, and merge them into a single Leviathan fleet. Each new crew adds ships, fighters, and skills, but every recruit also demands food, ammunition, and pay. That means Charles's growing armada is utterly dependent on steady supply lines, routes that run perilously close to hostile waters. Scattered pirate crews and mercenary bands throughout the New World have seized upon Charles's logistical vulnerability. Raids on his convoys have become so frequent that his forces cannot expand fast enough under the current blockade. Every lost shipment is a blow to morale and momentum, a thorn stuck deep in Moria's side. Now, with his patience waning and his ambitions hungrier than ever, Charles has ordered a sweeping offensive. 4 rival pirate factions stand between him and the sea lanes he needs. He's marshaled his fleet and is launching swift, coordinated strikes to crush these groups, reopen his supply routes, and keep his dream of the Pirate King alive. The next few days will tell whether Moonlight Moria's gamble pays off or whether the New World swallows him whole. Every day I arranged for the missing supplies to come in from the outside world. The quickest route led straight through the territory controlled by the 3 emperors. Unde, our Moria's regulations. All I needed to do was pay the standard toll and strike our flag, nothing more. In theory, that should have guaranteed safe passage. But Logue was absolutely convinced that the Moria pirates were the strongest force on the seas, and that their captain, known far and wide as Moonlight Moria, could stand toe-to-toe with even the 3 emperors themselves. In practice, though, the pirates had never dared to challenge the emperors directly, and their reputation had begun to fade. Fame, of course, doesn't equal invincibility, but Logue wasn't one to worry at first. After successfully slipping through the Emperor's checkpoints 3 or 4 times without so much as a second glance, he let his guard and common sense slip away in a rush of overconfidence. What neither of us realized was that Admiral Esdeath had already stationed her patrols in these very waters. Chapter 494, Dragon Caesar. The waters here lay between the warring empires of Esdeath and Katakuri, both so consumed by their own conflicts that this stretch of sea was all but forgotten. Smugglers ran wild, slipping contraband between island coves without fear of interference. To keep the lanes in check, Charles had dispatched his fiercest enforcer, Captain Caesar Drake, to patrol these waters with his flagship. As our ship rounded a fog-shrouded reef, we ran headlong into Caesar's patrol. The moment he spotted us, the captain thundered from the quarterdeck, "Ha! Who in their right mind dares sneak past me?" His voice boomed across the sea. We froze. No pirate dared flout the orders of the Rockefeller pirates, ever since they'd risen to one of the feared 3 emperors. Caesar's dark eyes sparkled with amusement. "I've seen plenty of arrogant rogues," he growled, "but none as bold or as foolish as you lot." He gave his ornate rapier a lazy twirl. "Stay right where you are," he said, "and prepare for a reckoning. I want to see exactly how heavy you are, how much trouble you'll be worth." The men at his side drew blades and raised muskets, their grim faces lit by torchlight. Without warning, Caesar cracked his knuckles, nodded once, and launched himself skyward. In the blink of an eye, he streaked upward, silhouette sharpened against the evening sky, until he disappeared like a falling star. A low murmur rippled through his crew. Following Captain Drake was a gamble. Victory could be swift and glorious, or it could be a plunge into ruin. As we watched the spot where he'd vanished, none of us could say which it would be. Unlike most pirate crews, where cannon fodder charges first under the captain's shouted orders while the captain himself remained safely behind, Captain Logue led his men from the front the instant he spotted the enemy, giving them no quarter. Not far off, a smuggling ship flew the Moria pirates' black flag. Suddenly, Logue's vision blurred, as though dark specks had erupted across the sky. He hesitated, stunned. "Captain, look up!" One of his underlings, a roughneck dressed in tattered pirate garb, pointed shakily toward the heavens. A vast, inky shadow spread over the sea. The air itself seemed to constrict, and Captain Logue felt his breath catch. Beads of sweat broke out on his forehead as he forced himself to raise his eyes, and there, hovering above the waves, was a colossal dragon. "Dragon! Dragon Caesar!" he gasped. This was no ordinary beast. After 3 years in the New World, every seasoned pirate in Logue's fleet knew the legend of the skyborn leviathan that roamed these seas. Yet none could explain how it had appeared at this very moment. His heart pounding, Logue barely had time to react before a blistering fireball streaked down from the dragon's gaping maw. The heat hit the water first, sending steam rising in a fiery plume that pushed the temperature of the entire bay skyward. Around him, his crew stood rooted in shock, eyes locked on the blazing orb descending from the sky, an omen of chaos none of them would soon forget. Heat breath. With a thunderous roar, Caesar unleashed a torrent of flame that shot high into the sky, engulfing the 3 Moria pirates' smuggling ships. The inferno was so fierce that even the sea boiled and steamed, wisps of vapor spiraling upward. When the blast subsided, the great dragon's jaws closed slowly, and a plume of black smoke drifted from his nostrils. "Unbeatable," he rumbled, surveying the devastation. Where once 3 ships bobbed on the waves, there now yawned a swirling whirlpool, filling the void left by the evaporated hulls. Caesar reared his head and bellowed, a roar so mighty that the ocean itself trembled. Then his deep voice carried across the water. "I'll take the lead. Follow my path." With those words, he dove into the clouds and streaked off toward the horizon. Below him, the distant merchant fleet, laden with goods bound for every corner of the world, froze in panic at the sight of the dread dragon's approach. A young sailor trembled as he whispered to his comrades, "He's hunting smugglers, right? My father always said that tax evasion is the most disgraceful crime of all. You can go to hell." Caesar's words cut through the salt air like a blade. He stood at the water's edge, a towering dread drake whose very presence felt like the brimstone breath of the underworld. His voice, low and cruel, sent a shiver through the ranks of nearby ships. Below him, a fleet of smuggler vessels idled. None bore the official colors of the New World's maritime code. In an instant, Caesar's jaws parted, and a colossal fireball roared forth. It streaked across the waves with pinpoint accuracy, slamming into the first unflagged ship. The hull exploded in a burst of flame, and the vessel vanished beneath the churning water. One by one, each outlaw ship suffered the same fate. Crew and contraband alike were swallowed by the sea. As the last smuggler deck disappeared beneath the waves, Caesar let out a pleased rumble. He seemed to savor the destruction, rattling off the names of the doomed ships as if they were new trophies in his collection. All around, legitimate merchant vessels trembled beneath their fluttering flags. Those banners, bought at an eye-watering cost of 100 million Baileys each, now marked the difference between life and instant incineration. The captains clutched their rigging and prayed that their investment would keep Caesar's wrath at bay. At last, the inferno in Caesar's throat dwindled to embers. He took a slow, deep breath, snuffing out the last sparks. With his vast, ruby-red eyes, he swept over the remaining fleet, ensuring no illicit ship had slipped past his fiery purge. Satisfied that only properly flagged vessels remained, he settled back on his haunches, the resonant echo of his roar still rolling across the silent sea. The afternoon sun beat down on the scattered merchant vessels below me. From high above, I caught snatches of fearful conversation drifting up on the wind. "Do you think we dare set sail now?" one trader whispered. "Do it or don't," came the nervous reply. With a bored roar, "Too dull." I swept upward and disappeared into the clouds. Father sent me to root out smuggling, and now that the smugglers lay dead, my orders were complete. I folded my wings, nestled into a fluffy bank of vapor, and drifted off to sleep. Below, the survivors on the merchant ships stared up in stunned silence at the massive dragon overhead. After a long moment, one of them finally murmured, "The Rockefeller pirates are nothing to trifle with." A cloaked figure at the back of the deck spoke next. "That's Dragon Caesar," he said. "Captain of the 2nd Squadron of the Rockefeller Pirates, and the eldest son of Charles Rockefeller. I met him 8 years ago. He was adorable back then." A tall man in a polka-dot hat, clutching a well-worn Bible, frowned. "Long," he asked his companion, "are we really going to join forces with the Rockefeller pirates?" Beside him stood a 4th conspirator, dressed in a way that made it impossible to tell whether they were man or woman. They gazed at the broken hulls around them in silence. All the while, I snored softly on my cloud, blissfully unaware of their plotting below. The dragon shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the colossal silhouette drifting among the clouds. The South China Sea is no longer tenable as our base. The Navy and world government have tightened their grip there. Every action we take is watched. We need to relocate to an island in the New World and continue our work from safety. Ivankov, the Demon King, flashed a wry smile. Our only viable ally out there is the Rockefeller Pirates, under Captain Charles Rockefeller. His past deeds suggest he shares our vision. I'm convinced there's a solid foundation for cooperation. The giant dragon snorted. Cooperation? From one of the emperors? I doubt he'd bother with little people like us. Ivankov's brow furrowed in frustration. We'll never know unless we ask. And our comrades, still trapped in the South China Sea, are counting on us. A faint gleam traced the dragon's scarred snout as he curled his lips into a fierce grin. Very well. Charles Rockefeller did once invite me to join forces, an offer I declined, but our histories are entwined more than you know. At their side stood Bartholomew Bear, a towering figure clutching a leather-bound Bible in his massive paws, silent witness to the pact about to be forged. What? Xiang, you actually know Charles Rockefeller? Why didn't you tell me? I thought I was your closest partner. Ivankov's eyes widened in disbelief. He could hardly believe that the bear had a connection to Charles Rockefeller. Chapter 495, The Revolutionary Army Arrives. Bipo shot Ivankov a sideways glance. You didn't even ask me? Ivankov froze, taken aback by the cool challenge in the bear's tone. Then he sputtered. Bipo, come on. We're partners. Best friends. You didn't think it worth talking to me about something this big? How could you not trust me? Ivankov's melodramatic protest hung in the air while Bipo simply stared, utterly lost for words. Some things, it seemed, never changed. Hidden in the shadows, Charles watched the exchange with a slight, knowing smile. The moment to step into the open had finally arrived. He drew a slow, steady breath, lifted his chin, and opened his eyes. Immediately, a silent, invisible wave of energy rippled outward, surging skyward and parting the clouds. Far above, Caesar Clown, who had been lounging on deck, jerked awake. His amber, reptilian eyes snapped open, pupils narrowing at the unmistakable presence of overwhelming power. It was a threat he had only ever encountered from the Navy's dreadnoughts. Is that the Navy? He muttered, unease creasing his brow. Within seconds, Caesar rose into the air as if gravity itself had loosened its grip. His great dragon form hovered motionless, scanning the empty horizon. The dozens of merchant ships moored here just moments ago had vanished without a trace. Only a single vessel remained, drifting silently on the glassy sea. That lone ship was about to learn just how real and how unstoppable the Revolutionary Army could be. Charles spotted the stranger standing at the ship's bow before his eyes even fully registered him. He narrowed his gaze, trying to place the broad-shouldered man with the intense stare. There was something familiar about him, but Charles couldn't quite recall where they'd met. Your Majesty, Charles, the man called politely, stepping forward. Would you join me on the bow for a moment's conversation? I promise you no harm. At his side stood Long, the legendary dragon warrior, watching Charles warily. Tension crackled in the air as Charles weighed his options. Finally, Long inclined his head and fell back, clearing a path. The stranger gave a brief signal, and another figure emerged from the shadows, a bear-like warrior draped in a dark cloak. He removed the hood and spoke in a low, respectful tone. Your Majesty Charles, the bear-man said, do you recall me? Recognition flared in Charles's eyes. You're the little king of the South China Sea, he breathed. But why are you here? The bear's solemn smile faltered. I am no longer king, he answered. We've come on behalf of your father. There are urgent matters that require your counsel. Charles's heart pounded. A stranger from his past had returned, and with him, news that could change everything. Charles, the bear's voice, calm and resonant, reached Charles through the afternoon haze. At that single word, he let go of the last tangle of tension in his shoulders. He watched warily as the massive creature contracted in size, fur rippling until it resembled a scruffy brown dog sitting on the deck. You came looking for my father, Charles said, rising to his feet. Who are you? The bear simply sat back, allowing the tall figure behind it to step into view. Cloaked in dark fabric, the man's features were hidden in shadow, until he drew back his hood, revealing a square-jawed face framed by coarse black hair. Allow me to introduce myself, the stranger said. I am Long, commander of the Revolutionary Army. I've crossed these seas to speak with Mr. Rockefeller. Charles frowned. Revolutionary Army? Weren't you active down in the South China Sea? Long inclined his head. We were, but we've since shifted our operations to the New World. Word is that the Rockefeller pirates now hold sway here, and I seek an audience with your father." Charles recalled the tales. Islands seized overnight, merchant vessels ambushed. "So this is a diplomatic visit." "In a manner of speaking," Long replied. He paused, as if weighing his next words, then continued. "If you could confirm my identity to him." Charles tapped a small transmitter at his belt. It emitted a soft beep, linking to a concealed earpiece his father wore. "Dad? It's Charles. Please pick up. I have someone here who wants to talk to you." The line crackled, then a frail voice answered after 2 rings. "Charles, is that really you?" Charles glanced from Long's expectant face to the loyal bear by his side. "Yes, it's me. We've got visitors who claim to represent the Revolutionary Army, and they want to parley with you." A salty breeze swept across the deck. The ocean's roar pressed in from all sides, as though fate itself had leaned in to listen. In that charged silence, the balance of power in the New World teetered on the brink of change. Chapter 7. An Unexpected Summons. A warm sea breeze swept across the pavilion on Kame Island, rustling the silken drapes and carrying with it the scent of jasmine. Charles reclined on a low divan, several maids in crisp uniforms moving around him in practiced synchronization. Their firm, rhythmic strokes relieved every knot of tension in his shoulders. A low hum of satisfaction slipped from his lips with each press of their hands. On the veranda, his son Caesar watched with a mixture of awe and envy. Finally, he stepped inside and spoke up. "Father, a man calling himself Long, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, has arrived and requests an audience. He's brought along the ruler we met in the South China Sea." "What was his name again?" Caesar paused, glancing at his aide, Bartholomew Bear. "Bartholomew Bear?" he ventured. The hefty clerk, Xiongzai, patted Caesar on the back and supplied the needed detail. "Exactly, Bartholomew Bear. And there's also a woman with them, though she's rather striking and unconventional. How would your highness wish to proceed?" At the mention of revolutionaries, Charles's relaxed smile vanished. He sat upright, the maids falling back respectfully. Why did the Revolutionary Army want to see him? He held their gazes for a long moment, then spoke with measured calm. "Bring them here at once. I'll meet them in the pavilion." Caesar bowed. "Very good, father. By the way, the operation is complete. Every smuggling vessel has been seized. May I request a brief leave in recognition of the success?" Charles inclined his head, already turning his thoughts to the approaching meeting. "You shall have your rest, my boy. Now see to our guests." Outside, the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the island, and with them, the promise of unexpected alliances and new challenges. Charles froze for a moment at Caesar's sudden shout. "Wait! Call your sister back!" "Right away!" Charles barked, tapping his handheld communicator. Moments later, he heard his father's voice crackle through. "You can return to Kami Island?" Caesar asked, barely containing his excitement. "Go ahead," his father replied. Caesar's grin widened. He snapped the device shut. "We're all set. Father wants us home. Let's move." He turned to the massive dragon reclining beside them, its scales a shifting mosaic of emerald and jade. "Thank you, Long," Caesar said with exaggerated formality. The dragon rumbled a low laugh. "No problem. My liege's summons is my duty." Caesar waved dismissively, secretly thrilled by the honorific. With Charles perched astride the dragon's broad back, they lifted off and set a course for Kame Island. Mid-flight, Caesar paused and fished out his communicator again. "Esdeath, stand down. Father needs you back at Kami Island immediately." Through the crackling line, his sister's voice was cool but obedient. "Understood." Far below them, 2 figures clashed on a narrow islet. Esdeath's blades of gleaming ice crossed against Katakuri's heavy Haki-infused strikes. But when her weapon left her hand and she turned to depart, Katakuri exhaled a long, relieved breath. He had expected to overpower her within moments, but instead found himself locked in perfect stalemate. In just 3 years, Esdeath had advanced from promising swordswoman to great swordsman. She wielded few. Tursight had fully awakened her devil fruit and moved with the precision of a master. Katakuri stared after her retreating form in stunned admiration. By the time Esdeath's ship moored at Kami Island, Caesar and Charles were waiting, Long's great wings folding neatly behind them. As she climbed onto the dragon's broad back, the 3 siblings set off together, bound for home and whatever fate awaited them there. Esdeath's cold gaze swept over the dragon and the bear, sizing them up with barely concealed intensity. These two emanated such raw power that even someone as unflinching as she felt the weight of it. Their third companion, whose appearance blended masculine and feminine traits, wasn't even worthy of Esdeath's attention. She would sooner tarnish her vision than look upon them. Long, the dragon, remembered the first time he'd encountered Esdeath. The lethal aura she radiated had stopped him in his tracks. What kind of battlefield butcher must one be to forge such a presence? Was every life she'd claimed a testament to her truth? A grim swordmaster, a death incarnate, there was something positively unhinged about her. A 2-day voyage later, the trio at last set foot on Kamai Island. The instant Esdeath and Caesar strode onto the dock, the local townspeople dropped to their knees, bowing deeply. "Mistress Esdeath, young Master Caesar," they called out, their voices trembling with awe. Neither Esdeath nor Caesar so much as looked their way. Esdeath wouldn't lower herself to acknowledge them, and Caesar simply didn't care. Watching from a short distance away, Long studied them both with intense curiosity. In the days they'd traveled together, he'd begun to piece together who they really were. Beneath Esdeath's ruthless exterior and the icy gleam in her eyes, he'd seen the faintest flicker of warmth, reserved only for those she considered her own. Chapter 496, Recognition. Earning a reputation through bloodshed is hardly unique, but winning genuine respect by it? That's a rarity. Take Caesar, for example. Outwardly lazy and always the first to complain, he'll grumble nonstop whenever a job comes up. Yet when push comes to shove, he never shirks his duty. He may fuss and moan, but the work always gets done, and he secretly loves the chance to show off for his juniors. Beneath all the complaining, there's a fierce loyalty and real affection for his crewmates. Among the Rockefeller pirates, 2 rising stars have emerged as the crew's greatest assets, fighters so formidable that everyone wonders how Charles managed to train them. Even Drago is intrigued, and I, for one, can't wait to meet Charles in person. Our small fleet finally cruised into view of a colossal castle, more opulent than any fortress Drago has ever seen in the South China Sea. Its towering spires glinted in the sunlight, intricate battlements curved like frozen flames, and every window and turret spoke of unimaginable wealth. "It's spectacular," Ivankov breathed, eyes wide. He licked his lips, already imagining the spoils. "If we plundered this place, we'd be set for half a year." Drago's voice rang out, cool and commanding. "Ivankov!" Startled, Ivankov straightened at once. His gaze darted around, landing on Esdeath's frosty glare and Caesar's narrowed eyes. A flush of embarrassment crept up his cheeks as he realized how poorly his remark had landed. Despite the hostile stares, Ivankov scratched the back of his head, realizing he'd just put his foot in his mouth. What I meant was an occupational hazard, right? Sorry. A disease of the trade." He offered a forced grin, but with his strikingly androgynous features, no one dared meet his eyes. Every head in the entry hall turned away. "Come on, let's not keep the master waiting," Long said, surveying the silent onlookers. With the bear lumbering at his side and Ivankov trailing behind, Long stepped into the grand castle foyer. A plush crimson carpet stretched from the doors to a raised dais, flanked by marble columns wrapped in gilded filigree. Dragons coiled around the pillars, phoenixes spread their wings above in brilliantly painted relief. Yet Long hardly registered the extravagance. His eyes were fixed on the throne at the far end. Seated upon it was Rockefeller Charles, his posture every bit the regal air. To Charles's left stood Barrett, silent and broad-shouldered. On the right, Carter adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sharp behind round lenses. Lining both sides of the carpet were the younger Rockefellers, dozens of curious faces, each child watching the newcomers with a mix of fascination and unease. As Long and his companions approached, 2 figures detached themselves from the assembled clan. Esdeath and Caesar moved forward in perfect unison, dipping into formal bows before Charles and then standing dutifully at his sides. Long paused for a breath, taking in the full assembly. Everything led to this moment. Suddenly, I noticed a purple-clad figure lounging at the edge of the great hall, casually swirling a glass of red wine. Monkey D. Dragon's eyes flicked toward him, pupils narrowing in sharp focus. It was the aloof Red Earl himself, Patrick Redfield. Rumor had it he'd defected to the Rockefeller pirates, and now I knew it was true. Dragon silently measured the balance of power between the two forces. A chill crept down my spine. From what we'd seen so far, the Rockefeller pirates were no joke. They boasted fighters on par with Navy headquarters. Rockefeller Charles, Patrick Redfield, Douglas Barrett, Rockefeller Esdeath, Rockefeller Caesar, and that lightning-wielding boy, Rockefeller Tesla. Against the Navy's elite, this crew was every bit their match. Even Dragon, the legendary revolutionary, seemed unsettled. I turned my gaze back to Monkey D. Dragon. The most astonishing thing about him was that his son would one day become the pirate king, Monkey D. Luffy. I wasn't certain the boy had even been born yet, but surely he must be by now. Clearing my throat, I broke the hush that had fallen over the hall. Monkey D. Dragon, I announced, son of the naval hero Monkey Garp. At once, every head in the room snapped toward Dragon. Even the Red Earl, who'd been sipping his wine as if nothing could disturb him, paused mid-sip, his eyes fixed on the revolutionary leader at the center of the chamber. Charles's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. You need to understand that it was your own father, Garp, who cut you down in your prime, thwarting an achievement no one had managed in 800 years. Your obsession with killing Marine Marshal Cyborg Sora has always lain buried in your heart. Had your father not intervened, you would have finished the job yourself. Long froze, his eyes darting to Xia Luo seated on the throne. A sudden hush fell over the chamber as everyone realized Charles knew Long's deepest secret. Yet, Charles didn't hesitate. It's almost poetic, he continued. Chosen by Marshal Sora himself and groomed as the Navy's brightest hope, you were hailed as the #1 of the new generation, the future of the Marshals. And now look at you. You've betrayed the Navy, founded a revolutionary army, and taken up arms against the world government. His words struck like thunder. The assembled crowd, from the lowest foot soldier to Baron Ivankov, Dragon's most trusted lieutenants, stared at Long in sheer disbelief. Never had they suspected their formidable leader was the very admiral touted as the next great marshal, the son of Garp, a man born with every advantage. Why would someone so blessed choose to rebel? The question hung in the air, heavy with shock and confusion. Long said nothing as he fixed his gaze on Charles, staring him down in complete silence. After a long moment, he snorted. "Humph. And what makes you think you're qualified to see me?" Without warning, the 7-star sword appeared in Xia Luo's right hand. With a sudden whoosh, he swung it at the Dragon Lord, unleashing a crackling green blade of energy that cleaved the air like snapped bamboo. Long's eyes narrowed at once, his muscles coiling with tension. Claws sprouted from his right hand as he bellowed, "Dragon Claw!" and lunged forward in a blur of motion. The emerald sliver of sword energy shot straight at him, only to be caught, astonishingly, in the palm of his clawed hand. A collective gasp filled the chamber. Charles's lips twitched in a wry smile. He had witnessed fighters absorb crushing blows and even devour ghostly energies, but never had he seen anyone physically seize a sword's spirit-infused slash and hold it as though it were solid matter. That single, effortless move spoke volumes about the Dragon Lord's power. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the 7-star sword dissolved from Xia Luo's grip. Charles leaned back on his throne as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred, leaving Long frozen in place, eyes locked on the motionless youth. Charles's right hand clenched, and with a crisp crack, the sword's energy shivered and exploded like glass. Its radiance scattered into the air, leaving nothing but a faint hum. A corner of Charles's mouth quirked up in amusement. So this was the counterattack? Hardly more than a parlor trick. "Well, you've earned the right to speak with me," he said coolly. Long's lips curved into a thin smile as he dipped into a slight bow toward Xia Luo. "Honored, Mr. Rockefeller, your reputation served you well. Much of what you heard is true, though admittedly a bit embellished, but those details are trivial. I'm here on a single business, to forge a friendship between your pirate crew and ours." "Friendship?" Charles leaned back on his throne, fingers steepled. "Do explain." Long met his gaze and spoke deliberately. "As you know, our revolutionary army stands in direct opposition to the world government. Our purpose is nothing less than its complete overthrow." Silence fell. Every pair of eyes in the chamber widened at the audacity of the declaration. Overthrowing the world government was the stuff of legends and nightmares. Finally, Charles let out a low chuckle. Is that so? And let me guess, you don't intend to rope us into your grand revolution, do you? He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth lifting in a wry smile. Charles had always sensed that his counterpart was dictating the tempo of their conversation. No wonder Sora held him in such high regard. What a gift. Not at all. We simply want to establish a trading partnership with the Rockefeller pirates, Long said, waving his hand dismissively. Chapter 497, Arms and Alliances. Wait, are you seriously proposing we recruit Charles Rockefeller into the Revolutionary Army? Commander Long's voice cracked with incredulity. So tell me again, are we pirates or revolutionaries? Sure, we've been enlisting anyone who shares our goal of freeing the people from tyranny, but every addition carries risk, and Charles Rockefeller is no idealist. He's an old gangster. I won't let him derail the force we've built. Across the table, Charles leaned back in his chair, an amused smirk playing at the corner of his lips. I'm not asking to enlist, he said coolly. I'm suggesting a simple trade agreement, trade cooperation, if you will. Long's eyebrows shot up. Trade cooperation? Charles nodded. He knew exactly how powerful his position was. Over the years, he had come to dominate the underground market for raw minerals. His operations generated nearly half of the Rockefeller pirates' entire revenue and supplied some 80% of the black market's mineral trade. Those numbers weren't just figures on a ledger. They formed one of the twin economic pillars holding the pirate fleet together. And let's not forget the other pillar, Charles continued, leaning forward. I was one of the New World's first weapons manufacturers. At its peak, my foundries accounted for roughly 30% of the region's arms output. I built that business from scratch. Nobody else comes close to my production capacity or distribution network. Silence fell over the council chamber as Long digested the truth. Without Charles Rockefeller's minerals and weapons, the Revolutionary Army's coffers would run dry, and its armories would stand empty. Finally, Long exhaled. All right, he said, steepling his fingers. Let's hear your terms. Later, through the underworld's black market, Rockefeller arms were being sold wholesale to weapons dealers on every corner of the globe. In no time, the Rockefeller pirates' name became synonymous with firepower. Any nation in need of arms now recognized their logo. It was almost absurd. Even the Whitebeard and Big Mom fleets carried Rockefeller weapons. Raw minerals and armaments had become the two pillars of their empire. Beyond those industries, another 20% of their revenue came from mining ventures, and 15% sprang from Niken's miraculous medicinal fruits, compounds so potent they could cure virtually any illness. Nobles the world over clamored for these remedies, and if production had kept pace, their pharmaceutical trade might have rivaled arms and minerals as a cornerstone of their wealth. The remaining profits trickled in from tariffs and licensing fees. As their empire grew, however, Charles and his advisors realized the New World market was already saturated. So Charles's cadre of maids, who quietly managed every aspect of the enterprise, shifted their focus to the earlier reaches of the Grand Line and the Four Seas, hunting fresh opportunities and new trade routes. Yes, the strategic mastermind behind it all was, quite literally, a maid. These days, most of the Rockefeller pirates' operations are managed by maids. Charles didn't keep so many simply for serving tea. There was something exceptional about them. These were the daughters of displaced princesses, nobles, and merchants, young women who'd received a rigorous education and possessed intelligence far beyond the brawny swordsman and his crew, whose talents rarely extended beyond pillaging and swordplay. On top of that, slave traders eager to train and sell high-value captives sent him a steady stream of beautiful girls, some lacking formal schooling, but nonetheless schooled in etiquette and obedience to maximize their price. Under Charles's command, each new intake of maids proved more capable than the last. When Shialuo first assisted Charles in overseeing the pirates' foreign trade, he immediately noticed how extraordinary these women were. They were sharp as tacks, their accounts balanced to the last coin, and their logistical planning flawless. Seeing their skill with his own eyes, Charles had no doubt whom to entrust with his overseas commerce. Charles's greatest advantage lay in one simple principle: let professionals handle their specialties. With that confidence, he never feared betrayal, only excellence. Charles had faced imposters and betrayals before, but with his mind-reading gift, there was simply nowhere for deception to hide. That ability was precisely why he could trust his hand-picked maids implicitly. Thanks to their loyalty and efficiency, the Rockefeller Pirates' operations went global in barely a dozen years. Their influence grew so vast that even the world government found it expedient to cooperate with them behind closed doors. Consider Seastone, the very resource the world government values above all else. It is also indispensable to the Rockefeller Pirates' mining ventures. Every known deposit of Seastone lay within Wano country, a territory firmly under Rockefeller control. That geographic monopoly allowed Charles to dictate supply, guaranteeing annual profits that topped 100 billion berries. He had orchestrated this success by deliberately throttling production. If they'd simply mined at full tilt, they would have flooded the market and lost hundreds of millions of berries every minute in plummeting prices. Instead, Charles maintained a steady output, preserving the resource's rarity and ensuring maximum returns. As a result, the Rockefeller Pirates stand unrivaled, the richest crew in the New World. Charles had expected the snickers. In the New World, no self-respecting pirate crew handed out monthly paychecks like a merchant fleet. Word would reach Whitebeard's captains and Big Mom's legions. Look at that boy, playing boss instead of raider. They'd mock him, call him soft. Let them. Charles knew his own purpose. He stood in the dim back room of a South China Sea warehouse, facing Long, the seasoned commander, leading the grassroots uprising. Lantern light danced across dusty crates stamped with the Rockefeller crest, the very heart of their unconventional supply line. Long folded his arms, his weathered eyes sharp. "You really think this is normal for pirates?" he asked, voice low but cutting. "Most crews run on plunder. When the coffers dry up, you resort to robbery or mutiny. Salaries paid on time, pirates would laugh you off the deck." Charles met his gaze steadily. "Let them laugh," he said. "I've got the credits, and I've got the suppliers, the Rockefeller Pirates Trade Network. They move rifles, cannons, gunpowder, top-grade weapons stamped with their seal. It's more than commerce, it's our lifeline." Long's expression didn't soften. "Revolution isn't a dinner party," he reminded him. "It's soaked in blood. We're rallying the people of the South China Sea to rise against the world government. When war erupts, it won't matter how fervent our cause or how many hearts we win if our men have no ammo. Time and again, battles collapse for want of bullets." Charles nodded. He understood the stakes. "Our men will be paid," he promised quietly, "and they'll be armed. Thanks to the Rockefellers, we won't run dry." Long allowed himself a slow breath. "Then let's make sure those supplies keep flowing, because once the first shot is fired, there's no turning back." Even after the Royal Army's rapid counterstrike, they'd reclaimed most of their lost territory. Starved for ammunition, the revolutionary forces had been forced into hit-and-run guerrilla tactics deep behind enemy lines. Recognizing their dire shortage of firepower, Long, using Xiong's contacts, had slipped into the New World to seek out Charles and discuss a weapons deal. After all, as the world's premier arms dealer, the Rockefeller Pirates had a practically limitless arsenal at their disposal. "I fully support taking up arms against the world government," Long said, settling into his seat. "But we need to hammer out the details. Pricing matters." Charles leaned back, unfazed. He'd sell to anyone, revolutionary, royalist, even the world government itself, if the price was right. "My terms are simple," he replied, coolly. "Negotiable price, top-quality weapons, and I'll supply whatever volume you need." Long's eyes gleamed. At once, Charles's close allies, Caesar among them, brightened, sensing opportunity. Even the dragon coiling behind Long displayed an unmistakable glint of avarice in its eyes. "Ahem," Long cleared his throat, producing a ledger and quill. "Mr. Charles, let's discuss specifics, delivery schedule, payment milestones, and, most importantly, our mutual guarantees." "Long, I can supply you with any weapons you need. Right now, we have 30 of the brand-new 1898 Rockefeller rifles fresh off the line, plus more than 1,000 cannons sitting in our warehouse. We can trade at any time, and shipping's on us." The moment Charles heard that, his tone shifted, and his eyes lit up. The 1898 Rockefeller rifle had been designed in '98 and officially launched in '99. From the very first engagements, it had earned a reputation for exceptional range, accuracy, and stopping power, qualities no army in the field wanted to do without. Chapter 498, Weapon Trading. Charles stood behind the polished oak table, watching the array of commanders and investors file into the hall. His reputation as a battlefield tactician was well earned. Enemy forces had learned to dread his name. Yet in earlier skirmishes, his revolutionary army had paid a steep price for lack of reliable rifles. That was why today's deal mattered so much. Long, one of the senior officers, shot a resentful glare at Xiao Luo seated opposite him. Charles shifted uncomfortably. In truth, the M98K rifles on display were nothing more than standard-issue models he'd reverse-engineered from memories of his previous life. There was no secret technology here, just solid, dependable hardware. "No problem," Charles said with a casual shrug. "We can finalize the trade whenever you're ready." Long's scowl softened into a nod, and Charles allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. With this sale, the Revolutionary Army's budget for the year would be balanced. Barrett, the chief of the science force, returned the smile eagerly. His division was long overdue for an arms upgrade. Even the ancient dragon financier overseeing the transaction chuckled in approval. Then Long's expression changed. He scanned the invoice and burst into surprised laughter, only to have it die in his throat. 30 rifles, he muttered, at over 30 billion belai. Across the room, a hush fell. The revolution had seized vast treasuries from displaced nobility and fractured kingdoms, and those assets had been redistributed to fund their cause. Raising 30 billion belai at once was challenging but doable. What stunned Long was the ammunition cost. Charles had actually quoted a total of 100 billion belai. Long's brow furrowed. He leaned forward, voice low and demanding. "Explain this to me. Why are the rounds so outrageously expensive?" Charles met him calmly, ready to justify every belai. The fate of the deal, and perhaps the future of the revolution's firepower, hung in the balance. Long had never traded weapons before, and it showed. He didn't understand how the arms market worked or why ammunition cost almost as much as the guns themselves. Staring in disbelief at the invoice in his hand, he blurted out, "Mr. Rockefeller, is this really how much we have to pay for the ammo?" Charles, known formally as Mr. Rockefeller, simply arched an eyebrow. He made it clear that negotiations weren't his concern and motioned Sophie forward. Sophie was his secretary, but in moments like this, she took on the role of chief negotiator. She stepped up beside Charles, her polite smile lighting up her face, but to Long, it looked every bit as dangerous as a dragon baring its teeth. For the next half hour, Sophie parried every counteroffer with uncanny precision, her voice sweet but unyielding. Long tried every trick he knew, lowering the price, unpacking extra items he could throw in, but Sophie met him step for step until, at last, the deal was sealed. When Long finally let Sophie and Charles walk away, he stood wiping sweat from his brow. The final tally on the invoice made his heart pound, 250 billion in credits, 30 rifles and matching ammunition, well over 1,000 field cannons with their shells, plus a haul of medical supplies. Long's stomach twisted. That one transaction had almost halved the Revolutionary Army's entire 3-year budget. If Charles ever really grasped the impact of this purchase, Long shuddered to imagine how furious he'd be, or how much his own share of funding would shrink. As he tucked the invoice into his coat, he could practically hear Charles's pulse racing at the sheer scale of what had just been bought. Charles Rockefeller had spent the past 4 years carving out a fearsome reputation with the Rock's pirates. Even after amassing a small fortune in the Valley of the Gods, his personal net worth still hadn't broken 500 billion. Yet Sophie, with barely half his tenure, already controlled more than 500 billion in assets. The world had gone mad. Long glared at Sophie's honeyed smile. Never again would he trust that siren. Her doll-like lips opened and closed, and his gold slipped away like water. With a disgruntled snort, he turned and looked across the terrace at the bear. The massive creature, having followed every glance, stiffened the moment Long met his gaze, folding his arms with a dark, silent warning. "Sophie," Charles broke into a broad grin. Fresh from closing the deal, he just learned its final tally, a staggering 250 billion. He strode over to the Red Earl's table, lifted the half-emptied tasting glass, and poured 2 generous measures of crimson wine. Holding a glass aloft, he offered one to Long. Sophie laughed and raised her own. To our partnership, she toasted. May it endure forever. Their glasses met with a crisp clang. The brilliant note rang out across the gathering, and in that instant, Long felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine, as if the echo itself had chilled him to the bone. Charles's bold gesture made the Red Earl, Lord Long, tilt his head in surprise. "Ha! May our friendship last forever," Charles declared, raising his glass high. Without a word, Lord Long downed the wine in one measured gulp, every drop of that crimson vintage gone. Charles winced. That wine alone had cost 250 billion credits. He swallowed his disappointment and offered a polite smile. "Lord Long," Charles said, "you must join the banquet tonight. I'd very much like to honor the estate's owner and celebrate our partnership." Lord Long set down his empty glass and met Charles's gaze coolly. "I appreciate the invitation," he replied, "but I have no time for festivities. My allies are waiting on those weapons. With every moment we delay, one more of them falls in battle. We must finish this quickly." Charles's grin only widened. "Then let us at least toast to your efficiency and resolve." He lifted his glass again, and the assembled guests followed suit, draining every drop in a single, unified clink of crystal. No sooner had the echoes faded than Lord Long nodded to his attendants. Within seconds, the ledger recorded a transfer of 250 billion credits, and a data slate documenting the arms deal slid across the table into Charles's hand. The transaction was sealed, and their new alliance secured. Charles wasn't the least bit worried about skimming funds from the deal. He knew that if he so much as tried it, Dragon would be watching every last soul in the Rockefeller pirates. And even if Dragon couldn't bring down Charles himself, he wouldn't hesitate to make Charles's crew pay the price. Still, Charles moved quickly. He summoned his headmaid and ordered her to ready every weapon and supply Dragon might need. He wasn't about to cut corners or stoop to bribery. On the high seas, a pirate's word is his bond, and Charles had built his reputation on keeping his promises. 3 years ago, he'd stormed Impel Prison without a second thought, simply to settle a debt to Shiji, and that act of unflinching loyalty was only one of many that forged his legend. To the world, he was Rockefeller Charles, Bo Yuntian, the pirate lord who inspired awe and devotion wherever his flag flew. Only Charles knew the truth behind the stories, and he'd let enough rumors slip out himself to make them all seem accurate, without ever confirming a single one. With the transaction complete, Dragon strode off Kame Island in a foul mood, flanked by Bear and Ivankov. When they learned the final price for weapons and provisions, 250 billion, they could only laugh in disbelief. 250 billion? Dragon spat. Even with free shipping, that's highway robbery. And so, under a sky as grim as Dragon's expression, they weighed anchor and sailed away from Kame Island. Charles had come down to the harbor early, determined to see the Dragon off. He stood on the weathered wooden planks, his eyes fixed on the massive creature's silhouette against the rising sun. Without warning, the Red Earl appeared at his side, his curious gaze following the Dragon's winding flight path. "You made quite a haul this time, didn't you?" the Earl asked, as if chatting about the weather. Charles shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "Not bad. After covering all costs, we walked away with a clean 200 billion. At that confession, the Red Earl's eyes went wide. 200 billion net? Shadowy indeed. I've never met anyone so unapologetically ruthless. The Earl had expected Charles to have earned maybe 60 or 80 billion at most, but 200 billion? 50 billion worth of supplies sold for 250, and a 200 billion profit after expenses. When had making that kind of money gotten so easy? The Earl recalled his own days, tracking pirate convoys for weeks just to snatch a few million. Yet here stood Charles, calm as ever, flicking his lips in a silent grin, and suddenly richer than most entire duchies. The Earl glanced back toward the Dragon, now a distant silhouette against the horizon. "Well," he muttered to himself, "you've earned it." The Red Earl still harbored a quiet grudge against Garp, though he kept it hidden behind courteous restraint. "Master," Sophie said, stepping toward Charles with genuine concern in her dark eyes, "we've nearly exhausted all our weapons and ammunition. Restocking will take at least 3 months, and during that time, the black market in the underworld will face a serious shortage. What should we do?" She approached him with graceful poise, sorrow and affection mingling in her expression. The Red Earl's skin prickled at the sight. He could almost feel the chill of her words, and he instinctively took a step back. Charles lifted a hand in a calm, dismissive gesture. "Don't worry about it," he replied quietly. "I'll make the necessary arrangements. There's no need for immediate panic." He turned away, already planning his next move, while Sophie offered a small, uncertain smile. The Red Earl watched them both, resentment still flickering behind his eyes. But for now, he said nothing more. Chapter 499, Tyrant Bear. "We've had our fill of meat. Now it's time to let them drink the soup," Charles declared, looping an arm around Sophie's slender waist. Sophie rolled her eyes, cheeks warming at so much attention from the assembled crew. Charles grinned at the officers of the Rockefeller Pirates. "Mark my words, over the next 3 months the black market for weapons will tighten up, prices will shoot through the roof, and we'll rake in another fortune. Just wait until the Navy and world government start scrambling." A ripple of laughter and nods met his prediction. "Tonight, though," he continued, "we celebrate. No more worrying about hitting 250 billion in turnover this year. Let's enjoy ourselves." The crew erupted in cheers. At that moment, his teenage son Caesar, already notorious in the New World with a 13 billion berry bounty, stepped forward, mischief in his eyes. "Dad, since we're flush with cash, when are you building me a ship? A pirate of my standing shouldn't have to borrow, or shamefully have no vessel at all." He shot Charles a teasing look, delighting in his father's sudden flush of embarrassment. Over the past 3 years, Caesar's bounty has shot past 1 billion berries. He spends his days roaming the Grand Line, occasionally wiping out world government ships or Navy surveillance vessels, and even sparring with rival pirates. Each skirmish only adds to his infamy. Charles rolled his eyes at his son's latest request. For years, Caesar had been begging for funds to build his own ship. Charles had hoped those pleas would teach him a lesson in self-reliance, teach him that running your own crew isn't cheap, that you have to earn every berry yourself. But every time Caesar came into a fortune, he'd funnel it all into the gold-selling cavern and end up penniless. "You said you wanted to finance the ship yourself," Charles burst out. "So why are you asking me for money again?" Caesar just grinned, utterly unrepentant. "Hey, Dad, you know I'm bankrupt the moment I get paid. Come on, just cover it. A ship's not that big an investment, right?" Charles stared at him, speechless. He honestly didn't know where his son had learned to be so shameless. All right, I'll support you with million belli, no more." Charles barely registered his father's words at first. He was still basking in a good mood, until he noticed Caesar's grin. That broad smile lit up Caesar's face the instant their father agreed, but when Caesar heard it was only million belli, the grin faded as quickly as it had appeared. What kind of ship could they build on that? Maybe a rickety wooden pirate vessel, nothing like the ironclad warship Caesar dreamed of. Caesar wanted a flying, steel-hulled ship on the scale of their father's legendary Poseidon. He'd even consulted master engineer Courant and learned that even a smaller version would cost at least 20 billion belli. That colossal price tag was exactly why Caesar hadn't moved forward in all these years. "Dad, me too," Robert piped up, tugging at their father's sleeve. "Come on, you can't give it to Caesar, and not to me," Sif shouted. "Yeah, build one for me too," Daedara added, stamping her foot. One by one, the younger siblings clamored for their own ships. Charles pressed a hand to his forehead, bracing himself against the headache building behind his eyes. With this chorus of demands, their father was going to have quite the headache of his own. Charles's worst fears had come true. The commission went to Caesar, and the rest of the children turned on each other, all clamoring for money. Charles sighed inwardly. "All right, enough arguing. Everyone gets X million belli. If there's extra, consider it a bonus. And on your birthdays, Dad will gift you the same X million belli, so you can even build your own ship." He swept his gaze across the group of 17 and 18-year-olds, then rested his eyes on Esdeth and Tesla. "You two can design whatever kind of vessel you like." Esdeth offered a curt nod, her face unreadable. Tesla adjusted his glasses and gave a polite nod in return. Neither of them seemed particularly interested in a new ship. Tesla was the first to break the silence. "Sounds good. When do we start the party? Charles clapped his hands, a genuine smile lighting his face. Right now. Follow me into the hall. He led his younger, underage children toward the grand dining room. Lately, he'd found the older kids less entertaining. No matter how much money they got, they'd lost some of their childhood sparkle. Meanwhile, far from the Rockefeller pirates' reach, Long sailed on with Xiong and Ivankov. After several more days at sea, Long pointed to a lush island rising from the horizon. This is it, he declared. Here's where we'll make our base. From now on, this will be the Revolutionary Army's secret base. Perched high above the sea, the dragon swept his cloak aside and surveyed the tiny island below. It lay precisely at the meeting point of Whitebeard pirates' waters and those claimed by the Rockefeller crew, perfectly hidden yet strategically placed. A weathered pirate flag flapped in the salt breeze. Xiong, the dragon said, fixing the bear man with a steady gaze. I'm leaving this island to you. The Revolutionary Army must remain in the shadows, but you already have a price on your head. If you're uncovered here, so be it. Adjust your plans and move on to the next step. Xiong nodded once, then closed the heavy Bible he carried and looked down at the settlement. The pirates who called this place home staggered drunkenly between shacks, utterly unaware of the danger looming above them. Their carefree laughter grated on his ears. This island reeks of corruption, Xiong said coolly. It needs cleansing. All around them, the faint cries of terrified women drifted up on the wind, voices of cruelty and despair. The dragon's face darkened beneath his hood. He had seen such suffering again and again, and each time, a familiar rage flared within him. It was that very anger, hatred for injustice and tyranny, that had driven him to abandon the navy and help found the Revolutionary Army. Swiftly, the dragon and Xiong set their plan in motion, determined to free the island from its filth and strike the first blow in a war that would shake the seas. Chapter 21. The Tyrant of the South Sea. Bartholomew Bear slowly removed his gloves and casually patted his massive chest. Then, as if vanishing into thin air, he disappeared from the deck of the revolutionary ship. Dragon's eyes flicked instinctively toward Kamei Island's harbor, and there stood Bear once more. Mr. Ivankov turned to follow Dragon's gaze. On the quayside, Bear pressed his broad palms together. At once, a ghostly, translucent bear's paw flickered into existence between his hands. In mere seconds, it swelled to colossal size until it loomed over the entire island, casting every living soul below in its unearthly shadow. Seconds later, Bear brought his spectral paws together in a thunderous clap. The shockwave ripped through the harbor with a deafening roar. One by one, the pirate crews, each cloaked in Kuma's Haki, were obliterated, their bodies exploding in crimson showers that painted the waterfront in gore. A few days passed before the full weight of the assault became public. Rumors swirled through the New World until an official dispatch finally confirmed them. The tyrant Bartholomew Bear, self-proclaimed king of the South Sea, has struck here in the New World and laid waste to tens of thousands of pirates. Instantly, the massacre stoked a firestorm of hatred among every pirate lord and privateer in these waters. Bartholomew Bear's reputation as an unstoppable executioner of the Navy had made it all but impossible for him to move freely in the New World, his very name now synonymous with terror. And back on Kamei Island, the survivors trembled in the shadow of the bear's inexorable wrath. Charles sneered as he scanned the front-page headlines. One ship after another slipped out of port, laden with weapons bound for who knew where. The more chaos, the more profit, he murmured, his eyes gleaming with greed. Chapter 500. The world was unfolding along its destined course. Deep within Marine headquarters, a secret meeting had been convened to discuss a seismic shift in the balance of power. Admiral Garp, fresh from the East Blue, Admiral Sakazuki, back from the South Sea, Admiral Kuzan, returned from the West Sea, Admiral He, who had just come up from the North Sea, and Fleet Admiral Sengoku, who had been stationed in the New World to keep watch on the three emperors, took their places. Alongside them sat Zepha, the legendary instructor of the recruit training camp, and hundreds of other high-ranking officers. Every man sat at rigid attention, awaiting the orders of Marine Marshal Cyborg Sora. With a firm nod, Sora activated the projector. A sweeping map of the Grand Line's second half, the dreaded New World, glowed behind him. He let his gaze travel across the assembled faces before speaking in a resonant voice. The purpose of today's briefing is simple. We will return to the New World and reclaim every inch of territory the Navy has lost. A heavy silence descended on the hall. No one had expected such audacity. Sengoku, the only officer present with extensive first-hand experience in the New World's treacherous waters, rose from his seat. His expression was solemn as he addressed the marshal. "Marshal Sora," he began, "this is hardly the time for an all-out marine mobilization. In the less than 10 years since we last held sway there, the New World's powers have grown exponentially. It's not just our forces that have expanded. Pirates, revolutionary sympathizers, even rogue warlords have carved out kingdoms of their own. Charging back in with everything we've got could spark a conflict we're not prepared to contain." Sora's eyes glinted beneath his mechanical visor. Around the room, the admirals exchanged uneasy glances. The map still glowed behind them, a stark reminder of the territories waiting to be retaken and the dangers lurking in every corner of the New World. New pirate powers keep springing up across the New World. Marco, Jozu, and Vista of the Whitebeard pirates, Charlotte Katakuri, Charlotte Cracker, and Charlotte Smoothie of the Big Mom crew, and even Esdeath, Caesar, and Tesla leading the Rockefeller pirates. Their heirs emerge one after another, making any hope of naval conquest ever more remote. Admiral Sora felt the strain keenly. He'd long known his tenure at the top could last only a few more years, and if he failed to secure new territory, he'd go down in history as the first admiral to lose ground since the Navy's founding. That shame was unacceptable. When Sengoku finished speaking, Admiral Kong dismissed him with a wave. "There's no need to persuade the Shichibukai," he said firmly. Behind his calm words, Sora braced himself for the battles yet to come. Fleet Admiral Sora rose from his seat, eyes blazing with conviction. "Look around," he began, voice ringing through the hall. "Our Navy now fields elite officers, more than 100 vice admirals and rear admirals, and a new generation of combat veterans, men like Kuzan, Sasaki, and Porosolino. At the same time, our seasoned commanders, Garp, Admiral Sengoku, and Zephyr, stand ready alongside us. I will personally lead this campaign. Our forces are more than powerful enough. There is simply no need to stay on the defensive any longer. Peace has returned to most of the world's seas, and piracy has dropped to a mere trickle. We have the chance now to eliminate these remnants completely. If we delay, the pirates will only use the lull to rebuild their strength. This battle must be fought immediately to show the world government and every citizen of the globe that our Navy holds indisputable supremacy on the waves." Boom! Sora slammed his fist down on the table. The assembled admirals exchanged eager glances, their hearts racing at the prospect of pushing into the New World and reclaiming lands lost long ago. "The fleet admiral speaks the truth," one vice admiral declared. "We can wait no longer. We must put an end to the pirates roaming the New World." The declaration echoed through the hall. Dozens of officers sprang to their feet, shouting their agreement. One of them called out, "But how will the world government handle the marshal's reckless antics?" No one believed that the higher-ups would simply ignore the marshal's wild behavior. From any sensible standpoint, the marshal had gone mad, and by venturing into the New World, he was practically courting death. Sengoku glanced at Sora, trying to read his expression. "Surely the government is aware of how extreme this is," he began. Sora's eyes remained cool and unruffled. "The 5 elders have reviewed my proposal," he announced, "and have granted the Navy full authority to launch a punitive campaign against the New World pirates." A stunned silence fell over the room. Sengoku's mouth flew open. "What? You can't be serious!" Before he could protest further, Sora's boot tapped the floor. His gaze bored into Sengoku's. The unspoken message was clear. There would be no argument. Sengoku clenched his jaw, bowed his head, and fell silent. "Understood," he muttered. When Sengoku finally nodded his assent, Crane, one of the 5 elders, exhaled in relief. The die was cast. The Navy would strike back, and the New World would soon feel the full force of the world government's wrath. Sengoku stood at the head of the conference table, every eye in the room fixed on him. Now that his promotion to Fleet Admiral was all but assured, he intended to move swiftly. "Today," he began, "we'll finalize our strategy against the 3 major pirate fleets operating in the New World. Deployment of our forces will begin on the 1st of next month. Admiral Kong nodded and passed out the detailed briefing documents. As each officer received their copy, the chamber erupted in urgent tactics, supply lines, patrol routes, contingency plans. When the meeting broke up, Admiral Piccolo, known informally as Warring States, stepped into the corridor, brow furrowed. A Marine known as Crane fell into step behind him. "Why did you block me back there?" Piccolo demanded. Crane's expression was unreadable as he replied, "The Marshal won't entertain it. We've slipped the Navy's grasp in the New World. We have to take it back. But don't forget, our incoming fleet admiral isn't getting any younger." Piccolo winced. All of their hopes now rested on the Navy's hard-won prestige from the past 5 years. If they failed to suppress the pirates in the New World, the seas would erupt into renewed chaos, and the already fractious Warring States period would spin completely out of control. In the gleaming heart of Marijois, Pangu City on the Red Earth continent, the Wulauxing Council chamber simmered with tension. Two of the Navy's highest-ranking admirals faced each other across the long, thick obsidian table. "Why did you green-light Sora's strike on the New World pirates?" thundered Admiral Nasjuro, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the hilt of the original Kidetsu blade. "Have you forgotten just how formidable our Navy has become?" Admiral Mazai met his glare with cool precision. He lifted a porcelain teacup to his lips. "Our fleet's strength has only grown, year after year, funded by the sky-high bounties we collect. We're more than capable of operating in the New World." Nazuro jabbed a finger at him, eyes flashing. "Besides, this was Sora's plan. If the world government objects, why? Imagine if the assault succeeds. What then?" Mazai set down his cup with a soft click. "Don't pretend I don't know your true aim. You're counting on a Navy disaster. Let our forces falter, and you can re-establish your precious Seven Warlord system. Have you paused to consider the fallout if this gambit fails? Do you think you'd survive Master Im's judgment?" A silent beat passed as Nasjuro's hand hovered over his sword hilt. His voice hammered the air. "You dare accuse me of treachery? Even Imsama himself would be scandalized by such a suggestion." Rage and resolve crackled between them, and for a moment it seemed the chamber's very stones old shatter under the weight of their dispute. Saint Nasuchiro's proposal hung in the air. At his words, Ma Zheng bolted upright, his face suddenly grave. "Saint Nasuchiro," he said, "let's not forget this came at the Navy's own request. I'm far from the only one who supports it." The other 3 elders shifted uncomfortably, avoiding both Ma Zheng's steady gaze and the stern look that Saint Nasuchiro directed at them. Ma Zheng had just outlined a new warlord system, officially empowering certain pirates to act as quasi-military enforcers for the world government. In essence, they would be private security forces, much like the Elder Council itself, but without direct naval command. Up to now, each elder's responsibilities had been firmly divided by region, and none commanded an independent fighting force. Yet the promise of wielding one's own private militia was impossible to resist. Since Ma Zheng first introduced the idea, the 2 elders who lacked any true military backing had been watching with growing interest. At last, the chance to legitimize their own power plays was within reach.